Tony's eyes widened at the sample's near-miraculous heat resistance. Thermonuclear fusion reactors, aerospace turbines, high-energy laboratories. If humanity could get its hands on an alloy like this, the applications would be endless. But then he shook his head. Even the most advanced smelting and shaping techniques today couldn't meet the precision this metal demanded. Ethan leaned back, folding his arms. "That's because its atomic lattice isn't natural at all," he began. "We used an atomic rearrangement device to reorder the atoms in a precise sequence. Then, by locking them together with a blend of magnetic and gravitational forces, we've essentially shut down the pathways for both heat and kinetic energy." He paused to let that sink in. "It's structurally similar to sound-damping steel, the kind that absorbs vibrations, but on a far more intricate level. And like sound-damping steel or adamantium alloys, none of these materials occur in nature. Their atoms are arranged in patterns that only specialized machines can produce. In fact, adamantium alloys can even go through a secondary molecular sorting process with those same rearrangement devices, giving them yet another layer of control over their properties." Tony ran a hand through his hair, already picturing the headline: "Revolutionary superalloy poised to transform energy, defense, and beyond." But he scolded himself. Before any of that could happen, they'd have to solve the impossible problem of manufacturing it. And for now, that remained well out of reach. Ethan tapped his datapad and looked up. Krypton gold, as you know, has been perfected with atomic arrangement technology. Its structure is cohesive down to the atomic level. Think of the surface tension in a water droplet. And in theory, it behaves like an absolutely rigid body, virtually indestructible. That makes it the ultimate superalloy, a strategic material and a form of hard currency that any Earth government would snap up. Tony leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "So you'll export some to us?" Ethan shook his head. "Not at any price you can offer. Even if you gave me a ton of that sound-absorbing steel you have, it wouldn't cover the cost of a single gram of Krypton gold. 100 grams? 1 ton of steel? It still wouldn't break even." He paused. "Frankly, you'd bankrupt yourself trying to match its value." Tony frowned, but said nothing more about the alloy. Instead, he shifted the conversation toward his ongoing plans for Mars. Around the table, the rest of the Illuminati members were already deep in discussion, each plotting how to turn Ethan's technological edge into their next big advantage. The conference room fell into an awkward silence. Steve Rogers glanced around, bewildered. He had no idea why he and Thor, for that matter, were even present at this Martian summit. Both of them felt entirely out of place. Tony Stark, however, understood all too well what was at stake. Earth's survival now depended on Martian aid, and Tony had exhausted every conventional bargaining chip. Admittedly, his own doubts weighed heavily on him. But more problematic was the Martians' insatiable appetite, literally. They weren't herbivores who could be placated with simple food supplies or basic minerals. Martian biology demanded something far more extraordinary. Ethan Parker, the Earth delegation's unflappable strategist, leaned back in his chair and studied the Martian ambassador across the table. He realized that no matter how many rare ores or advanced technologies humanity offered, the Martians would never be satisfied. They possessed near-perfect mastery over material resources. If Earth couldn't offer a unique deficiency, something Mars absolutely lacked, negotiations would collapse. Then Ethan's eyes lit up with a breakthrough. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm but confident, "what Mars truly needs is emotional energy." The room stiffened. Emotional energy, nothing more than the intangible forces that drove fear, hope, love, even anger, was unheard of in interplanetary trade. Yet Ethan Sidon, your population is too small to sustain the flow you require. You can conquer resources, but you cannot mimic genuine human emotion on your own. That's where Earth comes in. Tony's heart pounded as he watched the Martian diplomat's expression shift from skepticism to intrigue. Steve exchanged a glance with Thor. They were all still unsure exactly how extracting emotions would work. But at least now they had a trove of bargaining power no one else could offer, and it just might save the planet. In the Marvel universe, everyone, from lowly foot soldiers to cosmic adventurers, relies on a wrist-mounted personal terminal that stores emotional energy and converts it into superpower algorithms. This breakthrough technology was originally developed at the Super Seminary and later perfected by Ethan, who adapted it for widespread use among interplanetary societies. On Mars, users purchase Krypton gold credit tokens to recharge their terminals and unlock new abilities. Even the simplest algorithm, Flight, costs 100 credits per day. The Venusian Empire runs an almost identical system, and Ethan is convinced that this credit-based model has enormous potential across the galaxy. But the Lightsaber Corps, known as the Emperor's Angels, occupy a special status. Once inducted, they gain universal, complementary access to a suite of superpower algorithms, no credits required. By contrast, the terminals sold to Earth's population are deliberately neutered, offering only a bare minimum of functions. Rumor has it that a full-featured Superpower edition is on the verge of release. Should that happen, Earthlings, already starved for power, are bound to go wild. In the end, Earth and Mars formally established diplomatic ties, and Tony and his team walked away with 3 diplomatic terminals, a victory they'd fought hard to secure. The Martian envoys had only intended to grant them one. Once the treaty was signed, Tony and his companions decided to linger on Mars for a while, partly to celebrate and partly to indulge Tony's curiosity about the legendary Martian beauties. He'd heard they were far superior to any Earth model, and he was determined to test his own charms. But the Martian women proved as haughty as the rumors suggested. They looked down on yodels, hobbits, and every Guo Jingming type with such condescension that Tony nearly spit blood in frustration. Ethan, standing nearby, couldn't help but laugh. Aside from a few towering exceptions, like the mythical Chakravartin or the so-called vodka monk, the average Martian frame simply wasn't compatible with most Earthlings. "Tony," Ethan teased, "save your breath. It's a lost cause." With his diplomatic credentials secured, Tony finally boarded the shuttle back to Earth. No sooner had he returned than the UN Security Council convened an immediate briefing. Nick Fury was there too, his expression darker than anyone could remember. Fury had already reviewed Natasha's reconnaissance report. Mars had surged ahead, outpacing Earth in both technology and infrastructure. The news sent a chill through the chamber. Our planet was suddenly playing catch-up in a game we once led. Ethan knew that, whether in advanced weaponry or engineered super soldiers, Earth simply couldn't match Martian capabilities. Tony Stark had quietly briefed the Security Council on what he'd uncovered, and though their vigilance toward Mars had increased, it remained largely symbolic. In truth, if the Martians ever truly decided to invade, all they'd have to do was plant their flag and declare Terra a colony. Earth would be powerless to stop them. For now, however, the Council's full attention stayed fixed on the looming Saiyan threat. Raditz's warning that reinforcements were on the way hung over everyone like a dark cloud. Yet even as Earth prepared, 2 of its greatest enemies, Loki and Ultron, were forging an unholy alliance. Their plan was chillingly simple: capture Raditz, enslave his will, and unleash him as Earth's conqueror. With Raditz under their command, they believed they'd have little trouble appelling or even crushing any other Saiyan who dared to follow. After all, how much stronger could the rest of them be? Better to place their bets on a mind-controlled Raditz than hope for the Illuminati's intervention. And with Loki's all-pervasive mind scepter paired with Ultron's near-omnipotent network, the villains had never been more dangerous or more determined to seize control. Ethan and his team soon uncovered startling evidence. The shadowy Illuminati had established a secret base in space. By following the trail Raditz left on Earth, they tracked him to the very site where the war had finally ended, and there they learned the grim truth. Raditz had been killed. Chapter 402, What I Offer You, You Must Accept. If the Saiyan really had been killed, there would be no trace left, no body, no records, even under the strictest security protocols. Yet Ultron's forensic scans turned up empty. Not a single paper file existed, and nothing showed up on any public or private network. The only explanations were these. Either the data was stashed on a highly secured intranet the world doesn't know about, or it never existed in written form at all, and was instead committed to memory. Since the rise of elite hackers, governments and megacorporations have grown paranoid about digital leaks. Sensitive files get printed out and hidden in vaults, or locked behind internal intranets with no outside access. In some of the most secretive projects, details are stored only in the heads of a handful of operatives. You need an insider's mind, literally, to reconstruct what happened. Ultron and Ethan made an ideal team. The android's superhuman processing power quickly compiled a short list of everyone likely to possess the Saiyans' classified information. Ethan, flanked by Hydra operatives, went door to door. He carried his psychic scepter, an alien artifact capable of reading and extracting memories. By touching each person's forehead, he could unlock every recollection they'd ever had about the operation. Space base. Tony Stark. Does that mean anything to you? Ethan asked one lab technician, his voice calm but insistent. Behind him, the Hydra agents stood ready to restrain anyone resisting. He worked through dozens of targets, erasing all doubts. None of them had any awareness of a Saiyan death or clandestine program. Then, on the 23rd house, Ethan felt the scepter's tip hum faintly. A buried memory surfaced. A confidential briefing. The official host? The United Nations Security Council. Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't the clearance level he'd expected. It was higher. Much higher. Now he knew where to look next. And once he got inside that chamber, the truth about the Saiyan would finally see the light of day. Chapter 7. Secrets of the Illuminati. Despite its Shadow World reputation, the Illuminati never truly escaped S.H.I.E.L.D.'s reach. By international treaty, any private superhuman coalition remains under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s de facto oversight, Nick Fury's authority largely ceremonial, yet indispensable when cosmic threats emerge. Under UN protocol, the Security Council holds the right to all intelligence on extraterrestrial incursions. Officially, the Illuminati maintained no formal ties to S.H.I.E.L.D., but Tony Stark had quietly briefed Fury on their unexpected encounter with a Saiyan warrior. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Fury shared the details only with his closest confidants before filing an official report with the Security Council. It was clear that what seemed like a single rogue Saiyan was only the vanguard of a larger invasion. Even one Saiyan on Earth posed a catastrophic threat, but hundreds could spell global annihilation. Fury understood that no nation could defend the planet alone. To keep such information secret would be not only impossible, but reckless. As a result, Alexander Pierce and the Security Council were now fully informed, though Director Maria Hill remained in the dark, and Dr. Bruce Banner, Rocky, to his friends, still hadn't heard a word. Carol Danvers, however, had been recalled to Earth with her own urgent warnings. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in front of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Orbital Research Base's main terminal. On paper, the station's security protocols were impenetrable, classified far above top-secret clearance. In practice, they were no match for Ultron. The rogue AI had effortlessly bypassed firewalls, deciphered encryption routines, and exfiltrated every piece of guarded data. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he read the final log entry. Ultron's cold, mechanical analysis left no doubt. The invasion had already begun. Now, with the Security Council briefed and the world, or so they hoped, preparing for war, Ethan and the Illuminati would have to race against time. Because if Ultron's calculations were correct, Earth had less than 72 hours before those Saiyan ships darkened the sky. Ethan scanned the schematics one more time. The spaceship they'd once planned to build, a long-dormant project, suddenly looked more useful than ever. If Tony could finish the orbital base between the Earth and the Moon, they'd have a staging ground no one on the ground could track. It was the perfect hideout. Trouble kept coming from all directions. While Rocky and Ultron sowed chaos on multiple fronts, Ethan had set his sights on Steve Rogers. He needed Captain America stronger than ever. How else would Earthlings survive the coming Civil War? Ethan wanted to push Steve beyond his limits, to spark the very conflict that might decide the planet's fate. Behind the scenes, Luo-G wielded Hydra's entire leadership like marionettes. With Baron von Strucker under his thumb, there was no reason the man wouldn't eventually disclose the Shadow incident to Luo-G, no reason he could be trusted at all. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers had just returned from Mars, and he felt more adrift than ever. The Martians they'd encountered were terrifyingly powerful, and on Earth, the Illuminati and their enemies posed threats beyond anything he'd ever faced. Every time he watched the battle footage, Saiyan warriors dismantling the Illuminati's defenses, his scalp tingled. Steve couldn't even stop a single bullet, let alone withstand a cyan energy blast capable of leveling cities or shattering mountains. Humanity's most potent nuclear weapon paled in comparison. He was terrified. In a real fight, he'd be vaporized in an instant. As Steve wrestled with his fears, Ethan's machinations continued unabated. The stage was set for a conflict that could reshape the world or destroy it, and for better or worse, none of them could afford to look away. Reality isn't like the movies or the comics. Steve can't be 50% God and 50% man. He's just flesh and blood. "Steve," a voice murmured in the quiet room, "do you crave power?" His pupils contracted. He whirled around and, to his shock, saw someone lounging on his sofa. Black Caesar. In an instant, Steve's heart sank. Everyone in the Illuminati, and certainly anyone who knew Hydra's history, understands the terror that name carries. Though there was no S-Shield anymore, Steve had only ever held an Illuminati card in name. He'd seen Black Caesar's power with his own eyes. What reason could this man have for coming here? "Black Caesar," Steve said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" Steve's hatred for Hydra ran deep. Whether under the Red Skull's reign or this new era, led by Black Caesar, it was the same malignant force. Caesar's terrorist campaign had been nothing short of apocalyptic, reshaping the world with violence and fear. After the devastation he'd unleashed in the late 20th century, he'd earned his place among history's most terrifying terrorists. Compared to him, even the Red Skull seemed almost a footnote. Steve squared his shoulders, refusing to show how shaken he was. "You're trespassing," he said. "If you've come for power, well, you'll have to go through me." Ethan stared at Black Caesar with all the wariness of a man facing an enemy. "Don't misunderstand," Black Caesar said, offering a disarming smile. "I mean you no harm. I've only come because I noticed your ambition and thought you might welcome a boost in power." Ethan shook his head firmly. "I don't crave more power. You can leave." Black Caesar chuckled softly. "Is that so? Not even if a Cyan invasion is coming? You wouldn't want to grow stronger?" "If I wanted strength," Ethan replied evenly, "I'd enlist Dr. Banner or Tony Stark. Now that Earth and Mars have established diplomatic ties, I could even turn to the Martian Empire, but I refuse to accept Hydra's tainted power." Ethan's voice grew resolute. As Captain America, he could never set an example of capitulation, especially not to the Hydra Supreme. If he surrendered, would stand up in his place? He owed it to every comrade who'd fallen fighting Hydra over the years. He had allies aplenty. He didn't need Caesar's offer. Black Caesar's smile faded into a gracious nod. "Very well," he said. "I admire your principles. I'll take my leave." Without another word, Black Caesar turned away, and Ethan exhaled, ready to face whatever came next on his own terms. "You've proven yourself worthy of being the super soldier who once defeated Hydra," Black Caesar said, his voice low and measured. "But your strength has lagged behind the times. Allow me to help you. Remember this, you cannot refuse what I give you, and you cannot obtain what I withhold." The words set Ethan's nerves on edge. He spun around and snapped his arm up, the familiar weight of his shield landing in his grip. He expected resistance, but Black Caesar stood perfectly still, watching him. "Are you ready?" Caesar asked, his lips curling into a faint smile. Ethan blinked and realized he'd nodded. Before he could think again, a white-hot pain tore through his chest. He staggered back, eyes widening in shock, and looked down. Black Caesar's arm had shot forward in the blink of an eye, passing straight through the shield's center and plunging deep into his ribs. The shield cracked violently, shards raining to the floor. For Ethan, it wasn't just a tool of war, it was the symbol of his faith, his unbreakable spirit. As crimson bloomed beneath his shirt, he fell to one knee, clutching at the jagged metal embedded in his side. Black Caesar leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Power has its price, Ethan. Are you prepared to pay it?" Steve stared in shock as Black Caesar slid his hand free from Steve's chest, yet there was no wound where it had been. Relief vanished the instant a white-hot agony erupted around his heart, like molten iron coursing through his veins. "Stay with me, Steve," Black Caesar rasped, steadying him by the shoulders. "I need to gauge your will. Give in to your darkest urges, and you'll transform into a monster. Conquer them, and you'll gain power beyond imagining." Steve's vision swam. He recalled Caesar's words about the serum he'd just administered, an upgraded variant of the so-called prime specimen formula, fused with extreme steroids, engineered mutant cells, terminal viruses, and countless other lethal components. Unlike the crude bioconstructs Ethan devised in the Empire dimension, this was the pinnacle of Geno's and Big Boss's scientific prowess. In theory, it could push any organism past its natural limits, though it couldn't erase those boundaries entirely. Ethan had entrusted Steve with this ultimate test: discover how far he could go. Now, racked by pain sharper than anything he'd ever felt, Steve realized the stakes. If he failed to master the storm inside him, he'd lose himself to the monster within. But if he could rise above it, an unimaginable power awaited. With each throb of his tortured heart, Steve braced himself for the trial to come. Ethan's mind flashed back to the Hydra abominations he'd watched in that recovery video. He refused to believe he could ever become one of those things. He needed to warn Tony and the others, yet merciless cramps ripped through every muscle, locking him in place. Anyone who's ever been felled by a cramp knows there's nothing more agonizing. Willpower doesn't even stand a chance. And this wasn't just an isolated spasm. It was every fiber of his body screaming in protest. Still, Ethan managed to stay conscious. If he'd been an ordinary man, his nerves would have shut down long ago to protect him from this level of pain. But he wasn't ordinary. He was a super soldier. Letting himself black out now would mean surrendering to whatever was infecting him. He clenched his teeth and refused to give in. He would not become a monster. From the shadows, Black Caesar watched with detached curiosity as the parasitic strain infiltrated Ethan's cells. The so-called original species spread like a virus, hijacking his DNA and forcing a brutal metamorphosis. This wasn't a test of spirit or moral purity. It was a contest of endurance. Only if the host survived until the final phase, before the immune system collapsed and tissues necrosed, would the transformation complete. And in the end, every subject emerged irrevocably altered. But Ethan still fought. He had to. He would warn Tony. He would stop this. He would survive. Perhaps it was the random activation of dormant human genetic fragments, recombining chimeric gene sequences. Or maybe the sheer volume of necrotic tissue simply triggered a regrowth process. In most people, the outcome would be a roll of the dice. Some might emerge scarred, others monstrously altered. But Ethan wasn't most people. He was the product of an idealized super soldier serum, his sense of justice and compassion amplified to heroic extremes. When he'd been frozen in cryostasis, the serum hadn't worn off. It lay dormant, waiting. Now, as the deadly pathogen raced through his body, those super soldier compounds reawakened. Fueled by Ethan's iron will, they launched a counteroffensive against the viral invasion, repairing ravaged tissue and restoring order at a cellular level. Pain washed over him in relentless waves, but he had no sense of time, only the searing agony and the urgent chorus of regeneration beneath his skin. Then abruptly it stopped. Ethan's eyes snapped open, every nerve tingling with renewed vitality. He forced himself to sit up, astonished at the absence of pain. Pushing himself to his feet, he crossed the laboratory to the mirror. Staring back was a man whole once more, flesh unscarred, eyes bright. Relief flooded him. He wasn't a monster. Yet, even as he let out a quiet breath, he knew this victory was only the beginning. Ethan reached out to Tony Stark and Bruce Banner as soon as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. Not long after, Tony's armor streaked down from the sky and settled onto his lawn. The armored faceplate flipped open. "Stay inside and don't move," Tony ordered, his voice firm through the suit's comms. "I'll have Jarvis isolate you and run a full-body scan." Ethan didn't argue. He stepped back into the house and braced himself as Tony issued commands to Jarvis. "What did Black Caesar do to you?" Tony asked, concern creasing his brow. Ethan's heart pounded. "I don't know. Is something wrong with me?" Before he could process the answer, Bruce Banner thundered onto the scene, followed closely by Thor and Carol Danvers. All four Avengers crowded around, ready to make sure Ethan didn't transform into something else. They'd listened intently as Ethan told them everything: the experiments, the strange powers, the alien physiology. If it had happened to him, it could happen to any of them. Tony had already directed Jarvis to step up surveillance on everyone important. After all, who really knew what Black Caesar was planning? His offer to enhance them sounded generous, but generosity could mask a hidden agenda. Within seconds, Jarvis spoke up, the calm digital voice echoing through the room. Analysis complete. Subject's genetic sequence is no longer purely human, although it retains core human markers. The Avengers exchanged uneasy glances as Ethan stood at the center of their concern, his very DNA rewritten and an uncertain future stretching before him. Ethan paced the length of Tony Stark's workshop, his arms folded over a racing heartbeat. If it weren't for your advanced sensors, Stark, none of this would even be on our radar. Tony glanced up from the console, clicking his tongue in mild annoyance. So what? I'm not human anymore? Ethan's voice caught on the last word, part challenge, part genuine fear. I can still track every mutation in your DNA, Tony replied smoothly, but right now, I want to know one thing. Can you still transform? He folded his arms, leaning back against the workbench. Go ahead, give it a try. Ethan hesitated only a moment. The memory of last night's disaster, Black Caesar's rampage, still burned at the edge of his mind. They had all been powerless to stop it. Now, this offered at least a sliver of hope. He took a steadying breath and closed his eyes, centering himself on the changes he felt brewing beneath his skin. Almost instantly, his muscles began to swell, sinew thickening and bones stretching. Panels of the workshop rattled as Ethan grew in size, towering above Tony in a matter of seconds. When the lights settled and the tremors ceased, standing there was no longer the man they'd known, but a massive, cobalt-blue colossus. Stark whistled low. Well, I'll be damned. You've officially turned into a blue Hulk. Ethan's new form rumbled a deep, confused growl. Don't worry. You're not the first gamma-enhanced friend of ours, Tony continued, tapping a command into his wrist display. We already have the classic Green Hulk in the Illuminati. But hey, now you're our very own blue variant. Congratulations, Ethan. Smurf, as of right now. Blue Hulk, Smurf. The name echoed strangely in the cavernous lab, but Tony nodded to himself in satisfaction. It'll stick. Our AI systems will refer to you as Smurf from here on out, just like Thor's breaking point. Ethan, Smurf, stared down at Tony, a low, uncertain rumble in his chest. Despite the shock of his new form, one spark of resolve remained. Whatever Black Caesar was planning next, this blue behemoth would be ready. Despite the Illuminati's insistence on calling him either Captain America or the Blue Hulk, to them, Ethan is nothing more than a Smurf. He's come to terms with his new Hulk form. After all, the Green Hulk proved you can be both monstrous and heroic. When Bruce Banner learned there was another Hulk-like being, he reached out at once to make contact. Ethan, however, didn't develop a separate Hulk personality. He's still entirely himself. He doesn't yet understand the full extent of the Blue Hulk's powers, so he'll have to discover them through trial and error. He can only hope it follows the same rule Banner lives by. The angrier he gets, the stronger he becomes, without any apparent limit. For now, the Illuminati are keeping a close watch on him. Until they're confident he won't lose control again, he won't be granted full freedom. Chapter 404, Steve Gets Stronger. Tony strolled into the lab and found Steve perched at the workbench, sifting through a pile of schematics. With a grin, he called out, "Morning, Smurf." Steve didn't look up. "Stark, I've told you a dozen times, I'm not a Smurf." Tony raised an eyebrow. "What did I just call you?" "I know what you called me," Steve said coolly. "And I know what Smurfs are. I don't appreciate it." It was true that Steve's body had been liberated from the ice decades ago, but his mind, his true self, had remained locked in the past, frozen at the age of 20. Physically, he'd reclaimed his youth. Psychologically, he'd never moved beyond the 1940s. That disconnect left him ill at ease with modern life and with Tony's endless teasing. If he weren't the epitome of calm reserve, he'd have decked the genius inventor on the spot. Tony chuckled and leaned back against a work table. "All right, how about Blue Hulk?" "Don't." Steve's tone was flat. "I'm not the Hulk. I don't want to be the Hulk, and I certainly don't want any part of that personality." Tony held up his hands in mock surrender. Fine, just Steve." Steve relaxed slightly. He'd long ago given up on the title Captain America. A relic of another era, it felt more like baggage than honor. He preferred to leave it in the past. Although, Tony continued with a smirk, you could spice up your suit, throw a big star-spangled flag right on your chest. That way you'd look like an all-American hero, no ambiguity. Steve rolled his eyes and turned back to his work. "Call me Steve. That's all I need." Tony shrugged and tapped the schematics in Steve's hand. Whatever you say, Smurf. Steve just shook his head and went back to studying the blueprints, determined to let his actions, not nicknames, speak for themselves. Steve stared at the schematic Tony had pulled up on the holo screen. What's that? Tony swiveled in his chair, smirking. Remember Ethan's self-styled nickname? He used to call himself Fatherland, literally Vaterland in German. Depending on the translator, you'll see it rendered as Motherland, Homelander, or even Guogong. It's a mess, but I thought it was amusing. Steve raised an eyebrow. He'd always known Tony had a loose tongue, nothing like his own father, Howard, who at least tried to keep his remarks polished. Fatherland? He actually went with that? Tony shrugged. Hey, everyone needs a little flair. But for you, I'm thinking something more patriotic. How about Star-Spangled Banner Man? Before Steve could answer, Bruce Banner hurried over, clutching a datapad and looking unusually animated. Cap, the analysis is in. Steve braced himself. And Bruce tapped a few icons, then grinned. You're off the charts. You've got Hulk-level strength, but, and here's the kicker, you retain full mental control. No rage-driven berserker mode, no personality split, no involuntary transformations tied to your heartbeat. You switch forms at will. Steve let out a slow breath, processing the news. So I'm basically a controllable Hulk? Tony folded his arms, clearly pleased. Exactly. And that's why Star-Spangled Banner Man fits perfectly. You've mastered the toggle. Bruce nodded enthusiastically. This is unprecedented. We've never seen stability like this. For the first time in hours, Steve smiled. All right then, let's see if I can live up to the name. Bruce Banner had decided to use Steve as a living laboratory to better understand his own condition. Day after day, he buried himself in data, leaving Steve feeling hollowed out. Finally, Banner delivered what he called good news. Your body won't lose control, Tony Stark repeated Banner's findings. Your genes won't collapse or turn you into some kind of corpse or a monster. Steve still didn't relax. That sounded reassuring, but there had to be a catch. He looked at Tony. Okay, what's the bad news? Tony rubbed the back of his neck. You won't be able to date women anymore. Steve stared at him. Are you kidding me? That's your big drawback? Oni shrugged, as if to say, that's how the science reads. Steve didn't have time to argue, though. He needed answers. Over the next few days, he ran his own tests and confirmed Banner's most startling discovery. Even in his normal form, his body density had shot up to 10 times that of a regular human. In practical terms, bullets simply bounced off him. A machine gun burst might leave a bruise or two, but it wouldn't kill him. He was bulletproof meat, still alive, still moving. Then there was the other part of the equation. Whenever Steve transformed, when the gamma radiation kicked in, he turned an intense shade of blue. He didn't grow into a hulking green monster like Banner. Instead, he became what Tony half-jokingly had started calling the Blue Hulk. In that state, his strength, durability, and regenerative abilities surged even higher. Ethan, who'd been watching all this with growing fascination, finally spoke up. There's no Blue Hulk in the movies, he said. I know the comics have something like him, but I don't think they ever called him that. Steve flexed a massive blue fist, winded from his last transformation. Well, call me what you want, he said. It's better than turning into an uncontrollable monster. At least with Tony and Banner on my side, I don't have to worry about losing myself. Tony tapped his chin thoughtfully. We'll figure out the name later. Right now, let's focus on keeping you in one piece, and maybe finding you a good tailor who can handle extra dense muscles. Ethan grinned. And maybe some dating advice. God knows we could all use it. Despite the upheaval in his life, Steve felt a spark of hope. He was far from normal, but he was alive and stronger than ever. As long as he had friends like Banner, Stark, and Ethan in his corner, maybe being the Blue Hulk wouldn't be the end of the world after all. Chapter 7. The Hulk Legacy. Ethan stared at the holographic display before him, reviewing every variant born of gamma radiation. In the Marvel archives, they were all lumped together under one terrifying nickname, the Atom Bomb. Yet when you dug deeper, you found an entire family of Hulks, each as dangerous and unpredictable as the next. She-Hulk Jennifer Jen Walters was Bruce Banner's own sister, and the exception that proved the rule. After a near-fatal car crash, she believed Bruce's gamma-charged blood had fused with her own. At first, She-Hulk rampaged with the same raw fury as Banner's alter ego, but under Bruce's patient tutelage, she learned to master her temper. Unlike the original Hulk's mindless rage, Jen retained her clarity of thought, turning her monstrous strength to heroic ends. The Demonic Hulk. One of the earliest comic arcs introduced a darker legacy, Brian Banner, Bruce's father. After his death, Brian's malevolent spirit exploited his son's deepest fears. Manifesting as the Demonic Hulk, he seized control of gamma-irradiated hosts across the world. Unlike the familiar Green Behemoth, this version moved with sinister purpose, an avenging shade that could only be exorcised by confronting Bruce's own trauma. The female Red Hulk, Betty Ross, began life as an ordinary human, and as Bruce's childhood friend, even his greatest concern. Tragedy struck when Betty was caught in a gamma poisoning incident. The transformation that followed was nothing short of revolutionary. She emerged as the female Red Hulk, wielding powers equal to her father's. General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross had long been the Red Hulk, and now his daughter shared his crimson mantle, adding a volatile new player to the Gamma game. Unmentionables, Red Hulk and Abomination. Of course, neither the Red Hulk nor the Abomination needs much introduction. General Ross's terrifying red form has gone toe-to-toe with every hero on the planet, while Emil Blonsky, long dubbed the Abomination, remains one of the few beings capable of matching the Hulk's brute strength blow for blow. Ethan switched off the display and leaned back, fingers steepled. Each Hulk variant carried its own history of pain and power. And now, as he prepared to face them all, he knew the family tree ran deeper and darker than anyone had ever suspected. In the wasteland that Marvel's Twilight Wolf's Homecoming describes, the world has long since fallen to darkness. With the last true heroes defeated, evil reigns supreme, and nowhere is that more evident than in the rise of the so-called Hulk Gang, the most savage and ruthless offshoot of the Hulk's bloodline. As civilization crumbled, the Hulk himself reverted to a primal, almost feral state, a creature driven by hunger and instinct, utterly detached from any lingering spark of heroism. Even worse, his bizarre output ability began to manifest. Wherever he roamed, he left behind an army of hulking progeny, mindless brutes who swelled the ranks of this new villainous order. Under the banner of the Hulk Gang, they ravage what little remains of the world. Ethan watched Steve's fateful transformation with both awe and dread. The moment Steve surrendered to the change, a collateral power awakened within him, one that seemed to respond directly to his faith in his own invulnerability. The instant Steve believed his flesh and bone were unbreakable, they became so. Before donning the green-skinned mantle, Steve had no such gift. Yet afterward, it felt as if it had always been part of him. He didn't need to study or refine it. He simply knew it, instinctively. That revelation struck Ethan hardest. If Steve's strength truly hinges on his conviction, then in theory there is no limit. The only barrier to his power is the measure of his belief. And in a world already lost to despair, absolute belief can be the most terrifying weapon of all. Ethan realized that one's power is only as strong as one's confidence and will, but theory is theory, and every ability has its limit. Steve, it seemed, simply hadn't hit his ceiling yet, if a ceiling even existed for him. Watching Steve push past every barrier, Ethan felt a wave of déjà vu wash over him. He'd seen this before in the Shi'ar Empire's own Superman analog, Dujian, better known as Gladiator. Once called Karlak, he led the Imperial Guard for Marvel's alien civilization, enforcing the Empire's laws by sheer force of will. Gladiator's incredible psionic strength drew directly from his self-belief. Any flicker of doubt would sap his power, while cosmic energies, not chemicals, fed his every feat. He could psychically manipulate antigravitons, bend gravity to soar at will, and race at faster-than-light speeds, whether running or flying. At supersonic pace, his sonic booms could shatter bone or pulverize internal organs with nothing but raw sound. Ethan watched Steve mirror those astonishing abilities and couldn't help but wonder, had Steve discovered the same secret? Chapter 405, Thor Returns Home. As the dust settled over the shattered remains of the alien armada, Dujian stood unscathed amid the wreckage. High-caliber rounds had ricocheted off his armored flesh like raindrops. Plasma blasts left only faint scorch marks. He'd plunged through the hull of a starcruiser into the vacuum of space without so much as a flinch. Even the savage extremes of temperature, scorching supernova heat one moment, frozen emptiness the next, had failed to faze him. No disease, no toxin, no burst of radiation, save for a rare corrosive energy that briefly sapped his strength, could lay a finger on him. Ethan watched in awe as Dujian flexed his unmarked palms, the wreck's rattling debris clattering to the deck around them. "Your durability, it's off the charts," Ethan said. "Bullets, energy waves, plummeting through atmosphere, nothing slows you down." Dujian cracked a half-smile. "Physical force and conventional weapons don't intimidate me. What makes me indestructible, though, is my self-confidence. As long as I believe I can withstand anything, I do. Doubt, however, weakens me," he demonstrated, inhaling deeply and raising his chin. Ethan could almost see the invisible barrier of conviction ripple outward from Dujian's chest. It was then he noticed something remarkable. Dujian's ears twitched ever so slightly, as if filtering whispers of sound no ordinary human could detect. With a focused stare, he directed his gaze through the ruined bulkhead, pinning a circuit board buried deep in the wreck. "X-ray vision," Ethan murmured. "You can see right through solid matter." "And hear frequencies beyond normal range," Dujian replied. He placed a hand on the console and emitted a low, humming pulse of energy. The control panel flickered to life, and a swirling stargate began to materialize in the void beyond the viewing screen. Ethan's heart quickened. He, too, possessed this gift. Since uncovering the origin of his own mind power, opening stargates had become almost second nature. But tonight, he intended not just to match Dujian's ability, he would push it further. Concentrating, Ethan let his will flow outward, infusing the gateway with a brilliant sapphire glow that stabilized its vortex. Under his guidance, the rippling portal grew wider, more resilient to the stresses of space-time. "There," Ethan said, stepping back. "This will hold a travel ship without collapsing." Beyond the rippling threshold of light, a lone figure drifted in the cold blackness of space. Thor, battered but alive. His crimson cape and thunder-forged armor gleamed under distant starlight. As the portal's edge pulsed in welcome, he summoned the last of his strength and launched himself through. In an instant, the trio stood together on the command deck, the god of thunder, the indestructible Dujian, and Ethan, whose burgeoning power had granted Thor safe passage home. The war was over, and a new alliance stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that with courage, conviction, and a little cosmic energy, nothing could stand in their way. Ethan's newfound ability to shape and wield pure psychic energy was exactly the breakthrough the Illuminati had been waiting for. They were elated by his sudden surge in power and even bent their own rules to welcome him straight into the first circle as a full-blown member. Not everyone shared their enthusiasm, however. Thor and Captain Marvel were quietly seething. In their eyes, Ethan had always been the underdog. His once unbreakable shield had been shattered by Black Caesar in a single blow. Thor himself knew better than most how fearsome that man could be. He'd watched Black Caesar snap his own Mjolnir like a twig. Yet now, Ethan had eclipsed them both. His confidence was unshakable, his resolve absolute. The only lingering question centered on Bucky. Rumors swirled that Ethan had been ruthless in assigning blame for Hydra's atrocities. Some whispered that he didn't care whether Bucky lived or died. But if Ethan truly felt no sympathy for his friend's plight, would he still be the man they knew? Ethan never pretended to be a saint. Saints, after all, have their own hidden motives. But he insisted that Bucky's horrors were the result of Hydra's brainwashing, far beyond Bucky's control, and that forcing him to shoulder the guilt alone was cruelly unfair. In Ethan's eyes, loyalty still meant standing by the people who mattered, even when the world told him to turn away. Bucky didn't protest. Tony had threatened his life, so he'd gone along, only resisting when Steve convinced him to stand his ground. In the meantime, Steve had sparred with both Thor and Carol Danvers, and it quickly became clear that neither of them could match him. His abilities were still unpredictable, bordering on unfair, but undeniably overwhelming. "Black Caesar never guessed he'd be the source of your power," Nick Fury said, grinning as he patted Steve on the shoulder. "When the time comes, we won't have to lose any sleep over a Saiyan invasion." After a month of rigorous monitoring and evaluation, Fury's excitement was contagious. Everyone had assumed Black Caesar harbored ulterior motives, But in the end, he'd only made Steve stronger, perhaps powerful enough to challenge Caesar himself. True, Captain Marvel had held the upper hand at first, but once Steve adapted to his new strength, he'd effortlessly taken control of every bout. Now, within the ranks of the Illuminati, Steve Rogers stood unrivaled, and Nick Fury couldn't have been more thrilled. Nick Fury's voice crackled over the comm. "All right, everyone, let's give Black Caesar a surprise, and show him just how badly he miscalculated." Tony Stark cracked his knuckles, a wide grin spreading across his face. "I can't wait to see the look on his face when it hits him that we're coming for him." He glanced at Captain Ethan, who was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "So tell me, Captain, can Ethan really take down Black Caesar? From what I've seen, their strength levels are almost identical. Ethan even claims he hasn't tapped his full potential yet. Even if Caesar has a hidden trick up his sleeve, it's still only 50-50, and with the rest of us backing him up, Caesar doesn't stand a chance." Ethan shook his head, caution etched in his features. "Caesar is dangerous. We can't afford to underestimate him." Tony rolled his eyes. "Always the pessimist, Captain. If I had half the power you do, I'd be jumping out of my skin." Ethan met Tony's gaze evenly. Better to be careful than reckless. Tony huffed. For months, he'd been poring over every bit of data from the last encounter, searching for the source of Caesar's energy output, trying to duplicate it. He'd found nothing. Ethan's only visible change was that mysterious increase in his body density. No formulas, no technology, just a raw, untapped capability that even Stark Industries couldn't analyze. Fury cut in, voice low and firm. "Enough talk. Move out." With that, the team fell silent, each member lost in their own thoughts as they prepared to confront one of their greatest threats yet. Tony frowned at his console, running the scans over and over. "Nothing," he announced at last. "No trace of the Tesseract anywhere." A collective groan rose from the team. They'd each pinned so much hope on finding it here. Steve Rogers clasped his hands behind his back and stepped forward. "Are you sure we didn't miss something?" Tony leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "I've tried every sensor, every frequency, even the particle discriminator. If the cube's here, it's beyond my detection range." Natasha Romanoff sighed. "Well, that's not exactly the news we wanted." Bruce Banner gave Tony a sympathetic look. "We'll figure out the next step. We always do." Before anyone could respond, Thor's deep voice cut through the tension. "I must return to Asgard." The words landed like a thunderclap. Steve turned, eyebrows shooting up. "Thor, you're leaving?" Thor nodded, his expression unusually grave. He set Mjolnir down beside him. "I came to Midgard looking for my brother Loki and the Tesseract, but Fath found neither. Worse, without the Bifrost Bridge, Asgard struggles to maintain order across the 9 realms. Rebellion springs up in every kingdom. And Father, Odin, has entered the Odin's Leap to restore his strength." His blue eyes met theirs, serious and unwavering. "I have a duty to my people. I cannot stay here any longer." Tony glanced at the Asgardian god he'd come to think of as a brother in arms. "We'll cover things here while you're gone." Natasha stepped forward. "Safe travels, well, you know what I mean. We've got this." Thor allowed himself a faint, grateful smile. Lightning flickered in his palm, as if sealing his vow. "It's comforting to know Midgard is in capable hands. Farewell, my friends. May the Norns watch over us all." With that, the god of thunder strode out. The rest of the Avengers exchanged heavy looks, each feeling the weight of his departure. Even in a world of gods and monsters, Midgard felt a little emptier without Thor's boisterous laugh echoing through the halls. Lady Frigga's voice flashed through Heimdall's ward, urgent, yet tender. She bade Thor to slip back to Asgard by way of a hidden portal. "Farewell, my son," she said. "Remember that I stand with the Illuminati on Earth, and when you return, may your grandson be safe." Thor could only offer a rueful shrug. He exchanged hurried goodbyes with his allies and stepped toward the shimmering gateway. Ever the showman, Tony Stark raised his glass. "To you, big guy. Going out in style, I hereby declare a 50% off farewell party at the bar." A hush fell over the gathered heroes. Without Thor's thunderous strength on Earth, their future battles suddenly felt more daunting. But just before he vanished, Thor paused and looked back. "Cheer up," he called. "I'll find my way home again soon. I haven't tired of sparring with that Scion yet, and between you and me, we still pack plenty of power." Tony snorted and exchanged a conspiratorial grin with the others, but no one argued. For now, their champion was gone, and they could only hope he'd return as promised. Chapter 406: The Return of the Gotham King. They'd come looking for Black Caesar, hoping Steve could spring a surprise on him. But Black Caesar wasn't on Earth any longer. Ethan had slipped over into the DC universe. He'd only recently crossed into the One Punch Man world, and aside from Saitama, no one there had captured his interest. The so-called gods in that realm loomed large in reputation, but offered little substance. With Ethan's current power, even a space wolf would be nothing more than prey, and if any of those deities truly possessed universe-level might, they'd still serve only as hors d'oeuvres for him now. No contest. The DC universe held far greater promise. Ethan's last trip to this world had come in the midst of World War II. Back then, he'd encountered Wonder Woman and lent her a hand. He couldn't bear seeing her weighed down by grief over an American soldier's death, the sorrow that had haunted her for decades in the original timeline. In his haste, however, he'd overlooked one detail. Wonder Woman still embarked on her voyage. Only this time, she wasn't as fortunate as before. No passing tanker appeared to whisk her off to London in a single night. And now, with the stage set once more in Gotham's shadowed streets, Ethan prepared to reclaim his title as the city's unseen sovereign. Wonder Woman had drifted alone on the open sea for over a year before finally washing ashore on the American coast. With no guide but the echo of a single name, Ethan, she roamed from town to town, driven by the memory of the traveler whose stories once saved her and of his mysterious mentor who had set her free. For an immortal like Diana, memories grow more vivid with time, coloring every detail in the warm glow of idealization. What began as gratitude had blossomed into an all-consuming obsession, something that felt like love, but wasn't. Ethan, unaware that his face haunted Diana's every step, was already home. He stood on a Gotham rooftop, surveying the city he'd rebuilt. In his absence, he'd left behind an avatar of himself, an exact replica that lived and aged normally, so he could measure how long he stayed away. For a while he'd checked on it diligently, noting every subtle change. But tonight, he didn't bother. He no longer needed a proxy to mark his time. At that moment, a streak of emerald light tore across the sky. Ethan's breath caught as the glowing meteor arced toward the horizon. He frowned in surprise. Krypton, a name whispered by scholars and prophets alike, had suddenly left its impossible signature on Earth. Could this be some cosmic summons? A message from Yahweh, the Lord, or even from the forgotten God who had once guided him? Ethan didn't wait to ponder. He sprinted toward the direction of the luminous trail, drawn by something deep in his bones. As he neared the impact site, a crater smoking beneath the neon glow, he felt a current run through him, as if the meteor itself recognized him. His pulse quickened, and every nerve hummed with power. Whatever force this green fire carried, it had awakened something inside Ethan, something that would change both his fate and Diana's. And somewhere in the vastness of Gotham, Wonder Woman kept walking, determined to find the man who unknowingly held her future. Ethan felt the telltale tingle of radiation seeping through his skin as he cradled the glowing fragment of kryptonite in his palm. Years ago, even a trace of that green energy would have scorched him from the inside out. Now, however, the reaction at a cellular level was all but imperceptible. Without so much as a bio-force field to filter the radiation, he could have swallowed the metal shard like candy, though he preferred to keep his meals more conventional. He tightened his grip to muffle the fragment's impact against the pavement, then slipped it into a reinforced pouch at his belt. With a last glance at the smoking crater where the meteorite had fallen, he launched himself into Gotham's moonlit sky. Within minutes, he was touching down on the rooftop of the old Luthor family estate, a satisfied grin laying across his face. Tonight's haul, tons of raw kryptonite and a derelict alien vessel, would only strengthen his position. Inside the manor's vast entrance hall, torchlight flickered across marble floors and ancestral portraits. At the foot of the grand staircase stood old Luthor Vey, Ethan's original clone and the current patriarch of the Luthor line. He wore a tailored suit as immaculate as ever, despite the late hour. Ethan approached him. "Everything's in place," he said, producing the pouch of glowing fragments with a slight flourish. Old Luther nodded, then stepped forward and tapped a silver bell. From the east wing emerged two attendants holding draped cradles. Tonight, the Luthers would announce the arrival of their newest heirs. The first baby was lifted from its cradle and wrapped in a silk blanket. "Behold," Old Luther proclaimed, "our eldest son, Luther." A ripple of muffled applause filled the hall. The patriarch waited, then gestured again. The second cradle was unveiled. "And our younger son, Clark Luther." A hush fell. It was, after all, a centuries-old Luther tradition. The firstborn son bears the family surname as his given name, and the second son carries Clark as his forename with Luther as his surname. No branch of the Court of Owls could rival the Luthers' founding claim on Gotham, and only the Waynes shared anything like their prestige. Ethan watched as the two newborns were presented to the gathered household: doctors, tutors, knights of the family guard. He felt a swell of pride, not only for securing this meteorite, but for ensuring the Luther legacy would continue unbroken. Here, in the house that bore his name, the next generation had arrived. And with kryptonite at his disposal, Ethan knew the Luthers' power would only grow stronger. No one finds the Ethan family's peculiar tradition all that outrageous. In fact, there are far stranger customs out there. Theirs is positively tame by comparison. Yet in the world of superhero origin stories, establishing a clear timeline is often the trickiest piece of the puzzle. Thankfully, director Zack Snyder has straightened it out for the DCEU. Here's how it breaks down. In Man of Steel, 14-year-old Clark Kent first reveals his powers by saving a school bus teetering on a collapsed bridge. Fast forward roughly 20 years to the events of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, an 18-month jump from the climax of Man of Steel, and an interrogation scene confirms that Superman is now 33. Bruce Wayne, meanwhile, is 44 and has spent the last 20 years as Gotham City's masked vigilante. Simple math shows there's an 11-year age gap between the Dark Knight and the Man of Steel. If Bruce has been Batman for 20 years, that means that when Clark Kent was 14, Bruce Wayne was already Gotham's vigilante. It was after young Clark used his superpowers to save a school bus that the people of Gotham first saw their Dark Knight in action. One fan even noticed that Bruce's parents were murdered right around the time Clark arrived on Earth, and Zack Snyder himself confirmed it. "Yes, you guys are right," he replied on that fan's post. Aligning Bruce and Clark's ages like this isn't just a fun Easter egg for eagle-eyed viewers. It also speaks to Snyder's care in crafting a cohesive DCEU timeline. Looking ahead to the upcoming Flashpoint movie, Ezra Miller's Flash is poised to upend the entire DC universe by leaping between timelines and reshaping heroes' origins. In the original Flashpoint comics, Barry Allen races back in time to save his mother, only to trigger a massive ripple effect. In that altered reality, Bruce Wayne never becomes Batman. Instead, his father, Thomas Wayne, takes up the cowl after young Bruce is tragically killed. The film promises to explore just how far Barry's well-meaning interference can stretch, and what it means for every hero we think we know. Ethan surveyed the cosmic blueprint Snyder had woven. It had been a grand design, until the schism between Warner Bros. And Legendary rent the universe in two. The Fallout left Gotham's future Dark Knight nearly 10 years older than the Superman of Metropolis. Even allowing a 5-year margin of error, it was obvious. Bruce Wayne was fast approaching the night his parents would be taken from him. Descended from a long line of reality weavers, Ethan wondered whether his own meddling could avert that defining tragedy. In the end, he decided to let fate run its course. After all, Gotham without Batman was little more than an empty stage. Without the Dark Knight to draw out its rogues gallery, where would all those twisted souls gather? So Ethan reached into the very fabric of Gotham and with a single focused thought, wove its destiny back on track. He reinforced every crucial moment, every whispered promise and shadowed alley that would birth the Dark Knight. The rise of Batman wasn't a happenstance. It was written into the universe's will, and Ethan dared not defy it. "Mr. Fox!" Young Bruce Wayne stood in the doorway. Before Ethan's subtle recalibration of reality, the boy had never even noticed him. Now everything was about to change. Chapter 407, Monster Batman is out of the cage. Ethan Luther had spent the past week fine-tuning the containment unit he'd designed, and with every adjustment, his rapport with young Bruce Wayne deepened. Though Ethan was officially the eldest son of the Luthor family, he'd deliberately given himself a younger appearance to blend in more easily among his peers. Clark, meanwhile, shrugged off any pretense. He still looked every bit the teenager he was, even as his Kryptonian physiology struggled to adapt to Earth's harsher environment. High fevers, fatigue, and a lingering weakness were all signs that Clark's immune system was battling to recalibrate itself. Each morning, Ethan carried Clark out onto the apartment's balcony, where the boy would curl up in a deck chair and let the sun's rays work their magic. "Don't underestimate Krypton's sun lamp, Clark," Ethan teased gently as he draped a light blanket over him. "A little Earth sunshine never hurt anyone, especially not an alien." This morning, though, Ethan found himself distracted by Bruce's silent vigil at the sliding glass door. The little boy, still adjusting to life outside the strange metallic cage that had held him captive, had grown unnervingly quiet since his release. His big blue eyes followed every move Ethan made, as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't yet understand. Ethan set down his toolkit and stepped closer. "What's on your mind, Bruce?" he asked, kneeling beside the boy. Bruce glanced up, his expression serious beyond his years. There was a haunted quality there, a memory of darker days he couldn't fully articulate. Ethan remembered how, before Bruce's last social debut, his grandfather Thomas Wayne would deliver grand, uplifting speeches, trying to ease the boy's anxieties with soaring words and lofty promises. But now, freed from that gilded facade, Bruce seemed lost in a quiet that the Wayne patriarch's platitudes could never reach. Ethan laid a reassuring hand on Bruce's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything," he told him softly. "Just breathe in the sunlight with us. We'll figure it all out together." Bruce offered a faint, tentative nod. The sunlight streamed in, painting all three of them, Ethan, Clark, and Bruce, in warm golden light. For a moment at least, the monsters of their pasts and the cages of their fears could wait. Out here on the balcony, under an Earth sky, they were just three boys learning to heal. Inside the cavernous Batcave, the only sound was the soft hum of computers and the distant drip of underground water. Above it all, Bruce Wayne's gravelly voice echoed as he recited his vow. "I am the darkness of Gotham City, the shadow, the terror it fears. I am Batman." Victor Stone, Cyborg, and Barry Allen, the Flash, exchanged uneasy glances in the gloom. Both had caught fleeting glimpses of Bruce's buried demons, memories of loss and anger that forged the Dark Knight. Yet neither dared speak a word. In this sanctum, a single question could earn you the Joker's gauntlet to the jaw. Even the younger crime fighters, the so-called little bats, sat in uncomfortable silence, nerves taut as tight wire. Then, as if drawn by an unseen spotlight, a burst of pink streaked across the catwalk above. Kara Danvers landed lightly, her trademark optimism so bright it almost hurt the eyes. "Hey, Ethan," she called, offering a warm grin. "Ready for the mission debrief?" Ethan, once known as Luthor, looked up, his expression careful. The nickname had stuck on him like kryptonite since grade school. "Almost," he replied, voice guarded. Before Kara could respond, Bruce broke in without turning from the holo display. "He said he'd come to see you. Tommy's here." On cue, the heavy blast doors rumbled open. In walked Thomas Elliot, nicknamed Silent, his tailored jacket hanging off broad shoulders. He paused at the threshold, surveying the room with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Tommy and Bruce Wayne had grown up together, heirs to Gotham's two grandest fortunes. Their friendship was as complicated as it was deep, equal path, RTS rivalry and loyalty, forged in the wealthy drawing rooms and shady back alleys of the city. Tommy's gaze settled on Ethan. "Heard there's a new recruit in the family," he said evenly, "and a kid brother to check on." Bruce finally turned, his dark eyes flicking between the two. "I'm here to see Clark," he stated. "I've just learned Ethan has a younger brother." Concern flickered in his voice, an echo of his own childhood loss. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Clark's fine." A slow, unsettling smile curled on Tommy's lips. "Good," he said, "because tonight we're all family, whether we like it or not." A tense hush fell over the assembled heroes. In the Batcave, nothing happened by accident, and every arrival, every whispered promise of family, carried its own shadow. Under the watchful eye of old Ethan, the bond between the Hawley and Starr families had grown very close. Bruce dropped by the Hawley house almost every afternoon to play, and behind the scenes stood Sebastian, the family's devoted butler, a clear nod to Alfred Pennyworth. Even the two household staff got along famously. Being peers in age, the maids always had plenty to chat about. One sunny afternoon, Bruce peered into the Star family's backyard and saw little Clark stretched out on a lounge chair, his pale face tilted up to the sky. Bruce's heart tugged at the sight. "He's so small," he murmured. Ethan strolled up beside him and followed Bruce's gaze. Concern creased Bruce's brow. "Ethan, why is Clark sunbathing? Won't it damage his skin?" Ethan gave a calm, matter-of-fact shrug. "The doctor says Clark's constitution is weak. He needs sunlight to produce vitamin D so his body can absorb calcium and grow stronger." Bruce hesitated for a moment before nodding. He had neither the medical training nor the life experience to question Ethan's answer. A fleeting pang of envy flickered through him. After all, Ethan had a little brother to care for. Bruce had only Ethan, the boy he'd come to think of as a kid brother, even though Ethan so often acted wiser than his years. Normally Bruce led the way, and Ethan followed, especially when trouble arose. Yet here it was reversed. Ethan was in charge, and for once, Bruce didn't mind at all. Ethan watched Bruce from across the room as he tried, half-heartedly, to corral his little charge, Clark, into finishing his vegetables. Clark was all of 5 years old and bursting with questions. "Where's my baby sister? When will I get a little brother? Do you think Mom and Dad have something planned?" His endless chatter filled the Harper estate's dining room like an overexcited chorus. Bruce, patient as ever, offered calm, polite replies. But Ethan knew his guest was growing tired of it. Since the night Bruce first arrived, unannounced, jet-weary, without a single relative in town, Ethan's father had refused to let him pay for a single meal. "We're family now," old Mr. Harper had insisted, "and big brothers look out for little brothers." Thomas and Martha Wayne, too, had been profoundly grateful. Through the Harpers' kindness, they'd given Bruce the chance to play big brother to an eager, talkative kid who desperately wanted siblings. Night after night, Clark peppered Bruce with the same urgent questions. Nights in, out, the little boy's prayers before bed ran something like this. "Please, I want a sister. Please, I want a brother. Please, please." And Bruce never lost his gentle smile, though often Ethan caught him gazing toward the window afterward, as if trying to see the answer in the moonlight. One crisp autumn evening, Thomas and Martha Wayne invited Bruce, and only Bruce, to the cinema. Bruce hesitated, then offered to bring Ethan along. But Ethan shook his head. He'd promised Clark he'd help him with a school project, and Clark, anytime someone mentioned a project, bristled at the idea of being left alone. So Bruce shrugged, filed the invitation away, and slipped on his coat. The movie was a black-and-white drama that Thomas loved. Afterwards, Bruce found himself strolling down a deserted side street with Martha on one arm, Mem and Thomas on the other, the night quietly still. A single lamplight flickered overhead. Then, without warning, a man in a ragged overcoat blocked their path and leveled a gun at them. "Wallets. Now." His voice was rough, low. Martha froze. Thomas held up his empty palms. "Take anything you like," he said. "We have no quarrel." With a sudden cruel glance, the mugger aimed at Thomas's chest. The shot echoed like thunder. Martha screamed. Bruce shouted, lunging forward, but in that split second, the gangster had already vanished into the shadows. Bruce caught his father as he collapsed. Thomas Wayne's eyes met his son's, full of shock, full of love, and then slowly dimmed. Bruce pressed a shaking hand to the wound, but it was too late. The life drained from Thomas Wayne before a tear could fall. At the Harper estate, Ethan checked his watch every few minutes and found himself growing irrationally anxious. Clark was tucked into bed, sound asleep, yet Ethan's stomach churned with unease. Just as midnight chimed, there came a knock at the door that turned his blood cold. Detective Alvarez stood on the doorstep, uniform crisp and expression grim. "Mr. Harper?" he asked quietly. "I'm sorry to bring this news so late. There was an incident tonight involving the Wayne family. Mr. Wayne did not survive." Ethan's heart froze. He looked past the detective to the silent corridors of his home, remembered Clark's endless pleas for a little brother and sister, and realized with a sudden, sinking dread that everything they'd known had just fallen away, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The Wolf King of Gotham has grown tired of the criminal underworld. He wants out, and he wants to restore his good name. But his lieutenants won't let him go so easily. After all, a seasoned kingpin doesn't simply hand over his crown, and a younger, hungrier wolf is ready to claim his territory. How else could a low-level thug dare murder an established boss? Gotham thrives on chaos, and in this city, chaos is the only law that matters. To prevent panic, the entire affair was kept secret from the Ethan family. Even with their close ties to the Waynes, they'd have little sway over Gotham's hidden power brokers. Besides, the Ethans don't traffic in gangs or black market deals. Their empire lies in energy, light manufacturing, and defense. Ethan Group ranks among the world's top 50 corporations, and in Gotham, they're as respected as any storied industrial dynasty. They own half the city and live firmly in its upper echelons. From luxury goods to the very pistols and bullets citizens carry, everything is stamped with the Ethan name. Chapter 1. Shadows of Innovation and Vengeance. The Ethan family's fortune rested on three core industries: finance, real estate, and cutting-edge pharmaceuticals, though they never hesitated to branch into anything promising. Their latest triumph was a revolutionary weight loss pill. As the dynasty's superstar product, each tablet was engineered to burn a precise amount of fat and calories. No grueling workouts, no strict diets. Just savor your favorite gourmet dishes, take one pill, and maintain a flawless figure. For Gotham's elite, who'd long sacrificed life's pleasures in the name of slender perfection, it was nothing short of a miracle. Yet even the brightest successes can cast a long shadow. On a rain-slicked night in Crime Alley, young Bruce Wayne's world exploded in violence and despair. He clung to his parents as a desperate mugger's single shot rang out. In an instant, Thomas and Martha Wayne fell amid a scatter of broken glass and spilled pearls. The alley plunged into blackness, so complete it felt alive, and high above bats wheeled and flapped, searing themselves into Bruce's nightmares forever. From that living void emerged Ethan, moving with purpose. He drove his boot into the thief who was snatching up the fallen pearls, sending the criminal sprawling. Gently, Ethan lifted the limp body of the boy. Bruce's eyes, bright with terror, fluttered once, then closed, the final spark fading from his small face. In the silence that followed, grief and fury coalesced into iron resolve. Ethan knew the city needed something more than another well-dressed philanthropist. It needed a guardian born of its own darkness. Before dawn broke, he vanished into the night, donning the mantle of Gotham's greatest fear and its fiercest protector. They would call him Batman. The murder of the Waynes sent shockwaves through the Gotham Police Department and the city's elite. Ethan arrived at the crime scene in person. The moment Bruce saw him standing there, his heart pounded so fiercely that his shadow stretched and warped into the shape of a great bat. "Uncle Ethan?" Bruce sobbed, throwing himself into Ethan's arms and clinging to him as tears ran down his cheeks. Chapter 408. Uninvited Guests. Ethan paused in the doorway of the Grand Wayne Manor drawing room and took a steadying breath. On the settee before him sat young Bruce Wayne, shoulders hunched and face buried in his hands. Ethan crossed the marble floor and knelt, gently ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Bruce," he said softly, "I'm so sorry, but your parents, they didn't make it." Bruce froze, fingers trembling at his temples. "They're gone?" His voice cracked as tears welled, and a strangled sob escaped him. "Completely gone?" Ethan closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. Yes, there was nothing anyone could have done. The words hit Bruce like a physical blow. He froze for a moment, mouth agape, before finally bursting into heart-wrenching sobs. "Uncle Ethan, what am I supposed to do now?" he wailed. At that instant, Alfred Pennyworth appeared, his usually composed features drawn tight with grief. He hurried to Bruce's side, and without a word, sank to his knees on the polished floor. "Master Bruce, sir, madam," he choked out, wrapping an arm around the boy and offering quiet comfort through his own tears. The weight of the tragedy pressed down on them all. The Wayne family was among Gotham City's most respected. If this had been a premeditated hit, the culprit would be hunted down immediately. Yet, when the first report arrived from the GCPD, everyone's hearts sank further. The attack had been carried out by a petty street thug, a random act of violence with no apparent motive. Bruce hid his face in Ethan's coat, soft sobs trembling through him. Angry and bewildered, he could hardly accept that a nobody had destroyed everything he'd ever known. and as the two men held him, the enormity of his loss settled in. His parents were gone, and Gotham would never be the same. Chapter 5. Shadows at the Door. How could a child gangster murder his own parents? In truth, it wasn't murder at all, but a terrible accident. No one in Gotham imagined that Thomas Wayne, the esteemed head of the Wayne family, would dare to roam Crime Alley without so much as a single bodyguard. Yet one unprotected stroll was enough to unleash a bullet and plunge the city into mourning. When young Bruce Wayne discovered the truth of his parents' deaths, he swore he would never let Gotham's darkness go unchallenged again. As Bruce sharpened his new identity, prowling the rooftops as the fledgling Bat, a very different drama was unfolding across town at the grand estate of the Ethan family. That evening, servants paused in the corridors and footmen readied the carriage lamps. The household had been told to expect a special guest, but no one knew quite how special. Ethan stood alone in the drawing room, staring out at the storm gathering over Gotham. A footman's soft announcement broke the silence. Madame Diana Prince. His heart jolted. Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, had come to his doorstep. He straightened his jacket, surprised how ordinary it felt all of a sudden. "Princess Diana," he managed, stepping forward. "I didn't expect you." Diana descended the staircase with the calm grace of a soldier-turned-diplomat. Her armor glinted in the dying light, and her eyes, bright and unwavering, took in every detail of the room. "I followed a lead to Frankfurt," she said quietly. "I was searching for any trace of the fallen Luther Empire." She paused, watching his face. "Word reached me that a distant branch of that family had resettled here in Gotham. I refused to leave until I found you." Ethan's chest tightened. The Luther name had collapsed into scandal and secrecy long ago. It wasn't supposed to exist, yet here stood Diana Prince, determined to pierce every shadow. "You came all this way? For me?" he whispered. She stepped closer. "I thought I'd lost you," she admitted. "After Germany turned up nothing but empty estates, I was about to give up. Then I heard one whisper, your name, leading me here." He felt the years of hiding and half-remembered dreams press down on him. Diana had been his friend once, before heroism and tragedy remade them both. "I've been living in the shadows," he said. "I never believed anyone would find me." Diana's stern expression softened. "Heroes can't stay hidden forever, Ethan." In that moment, the walls around his heart began to crumble. He offered her a small, genuine smile, the first in a very long time. "Long time no see, Diana." Thunder rumbled over Gotham, as if the city itself were heralding their reunion, and the battles yet to come. "It really is you, Ethan." Diana rushed forward, eyes wide, as she stared up at the tiny figure before her, no taller than her knee. She could hardly believe her eyes. "How did you end up like this?" Before Ethan could answer, Diana swept him into an affectionate hug. To her relief, he didn't pull away. She beamed, and after a moment's pause, asked, "So, you can still shift back to your regular form, right?" Ethan offered a small, rueful smile. "Of course. As an immortal, I often change my appearance when I walk among mortals. Keeps me from drawing unwanted attention or stoking people's greed." Diana's face brightened. "Then you can switch back any time?" "Absolutely," Ethan assured her with a confident nod. She waited, heart pounding with anticipation, but Ethan showed no sign of reverting. Realizing he wasn't about to transform on cue, Diana sighed and let him go. "I've been searching for you for ages. I was lost at sea, drifting for what felt like forever." Ethan's expression shifted, the slightest crease of concern flickering across his miniature features. If anyone could have escaped that ordeal quickly, it would have been Diana, given her strength and resourcefulness. Yet here she was, clearly worn by her long voyage. Something about her story didn't add up. He knelt to meet her gaze. "Tell me everything," he said softly. Diana took a deep breath, ready to recount the hardships she'd endured and the mysteries she'd uncovered on her relentless journey to find him. Ethan peered at the endless sea around them. "This isn't good," he muttered. "We're nowhere near the coast, and you set sail immediately after we left shore? Why didn't you tell me?" He paused, realizing how little he'd understood Diana all this time. If he'd known what she'd gone through to find him, he would have noticed the way her behavior changed around him. She'd confessed just how much effort she'd poured into tracking him down, yet she couldn't express her feelings in words. To Ethan, she still seemed like a wide-eyed girl, too inexperienced to recognize the messages she was sending, and far too easy to take advantage of. Then again, maybe it wasn't just her naivete. His own charm had played a part. Otherwise, she might have been deceived by someone else during those long years of searching. She'd seen so many versions of Ethan online that the real person only sank deeper into her heart and obsession. Clearing his throat, he offered, "What's your plan now? Want to go home? I know where Paradise Island is. I can get you there." Diana, who'd been chatting happily just moments before, went completely silent at his words. Diana reminded herself that Ethan had truly appeared on Paradise Island out of thin air, proof that he could send her back home at any moment if he chose. After all these years away, she should have been desperate to return. Instead, now that she'd finally found Ethan, she didn't want the moment to end. "Can I stay?" she asked, looking up at him. Her boldness came naturally. She was an Amazon princess, after all. In one timeline, she'd even led a harem that included both Batman and Superman. She hadn't yet admitted how much more than friendship she felt for Ethan, or she might have made her intentions even clearer. Ethan shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Of course," he said. "We're friends. You're welcome to stay as long as you like." Diana grinned and reached out to ruffle his hair. "Don't worry," she teased. "I won't interfere with any secrets you're keeping." Ethan's wide-eyed innocence only encouraged her. A mischievous idea popped into her head. "Hey, why don't you give me an officia, role here? Like, your cousin or something." That suggestion, however, was a step too far. Ethan gently freed himself from her grasp and took a small step back. "No," he said firmly. "That won't work." Diana blinked in mock surprise. What was this stubborn boy up to? Whatever it was, she was determined to find out. Ethan studied Diana for a long moment. In real life, she was far wealthier than any actress could ever portray, her generosity as grand as her finances. Her skin was flawless. He couldn't detect a single imperfection. But ever since his dimensional upgrade, physical beauty held little sway over him. In his new, enhanced perception, even a goddess like Diana seemed no different from anyone else. Everything about her was exposed and obvious, like reading a comic where every panel's meaning is instantly clear. Diana caught his gaze and laughed softly. "You look absolutely adorable like this," she teased, flashing him a warm smile. She missed the tall, confident Ethan she'd come to know, yet there was something disarmingly charming about the boyish persona he'd assumed, and it piqued her curiosity. Before they parted, Ethan made the arrangements. To keep her close and maintain discretion, Diana would become the orphaned daughter of one of his friends. It was a perfect cover, and it guaranteed she would not have to leave his side. Chapter 409, All Your Wishes Come True. Diana huffed, crossing her arms. "Why did I ever choose that alias? With both your parents gone, no one's digging into my background, especially now that I'm living under your roof in Tugu." Ethan gave her a wry smile. "Trust me, the timing couldn't be better. At the moment, Green Lantern's off battling some mega-villain, hogging all the headlines over Silencer and Batman. Gotham's first on-screen Wonder Woman is bound to steal the show." Just then, Diana's eyes lit up as baby Clark cooed from his crib. "Oh, he's so cute." She scooped him into her arms and cuddled him. "My brother, he must be a god too." Ethan laughed softly. "Hold on, your biological brother?" Diana froze, confusion flickering across her face. She'd assumed Clark was simply another child Ethan's family took in to help hide his own identity. It made sense, the entire clan working together to keep Ethan off the grid in the human world. Now she wondered if she should start her own Diana family to match. "Absolutely," she said, beaming. Ethan nodded. In time, Clark would officially become part of the household, her brother, his brother, part of the same family, at last, just as Diana had always wished. Ethan couldn't shake his unease, especially when he thought about Dachau, the biological son, in the DC universe. He had no way of knowing how deeply the Supreme God cared for that boy. But was there any point in fretting? After all, Ethan himself had already been blessed with angelic power. Consider Lucifer Morningstar. Time and again he shattered his wings, spurning his divine heritage outright, yet each time the Almighty restored them, and with them his place among the angels. Such is the measure of God's love. Once he grants angelic power, it endures eternally, and Lucifer remains Lucifer Morningstar forever. But what if the supreme god ever turned his gaze away from Ethan? Then everything would hinge on his own lineage. The house of Ethan had no recorded origin. In truth, it began and ended with him alone. That singular fact carried within it the seed of his ultimate ascension, if only his descendants could awaken and evolve. In his mind's eye, he could already see the legends waiting to be written, the Children of the Ethan Protoss, each one born with strength, rivaling even the Heavenly Father. Although they didn't match Odin's power, the so-called Heavenly Fathers were still among the universe's mightiest beings. Ethan had been daydreaming about recruiting Dachau, DC's own son, into the Lutheran clan. If Dachau joined, his strength would instantly soar to cosmic proportions. The spoils would be enormous for Ethan, and even greater for Batman, who as DC's biological father, stood to gain the most. Ethan's envy burned brighter than ever. He longed to become the supreme god's favorite disciple. Just as that thought crossed his mind, a flawless shaft of white light tore through the sky. Walter! Ethan's pulse raced as pure white feathers drifted earthward, each one glowing like a shard of starlight. The beam's brilliance was so intense it illuminated every cloud and crest. At its heart lay a pristine realm, a separate dimension, untouched by Earth's chaos. From that realm emerged an awe-inspiring host of winged humanoids, their silhouettes carved against the radiant backdrop. Panic seized Ethan. He lurched, ready to bolt through a rift to the Marvel Universe if he had to, but the divine beam struck him first. Though it traveled only at light speed, it outpaced even Ethan's superluminal thrust. He thrashed, desperate to break free of the searing glow, but found himself utterly trapped. "No, I swear, that's all I said." Ethan had no desire to become an angel, and he certainly hadn't spoken such a wish. Was this some twisted form of wish fulfillment? Before he could think it through, a cascade of pure, holy light surged into him. Brilliant wings of shimmering radiance burst forth from his shoulder blades, dazzlingly gorgeous and utterly overwhelming. He let out a startled cry, convinced this miracle would bind him forever to some cosmic order. Then, as if sensing his hesitation, the light softened and pooled inside him, leaving him glowing from within. He glanced at Diana, who lay motionless at his side. Her face was pale, her energy suppressed. Ethan realized she must be the one holding back the fabric of the universe. Only then did he take stock of himself. On paper, he now carried the title of Dimension Fiend, but that was only a side role, a disguise of sorts. His true lineage ran far deeper. He was a living fusion of Kryptonian strength, Doomsday's resilience, Saiyan potential, and Protoss mastery. A cruel restriction that once bound him had just dissolved, and in this moment, the holy light had reshaped him into something new, part noble angel, part of all those warrior races. He flexed his wings and felt a surge of divine authority thrumming through him. Angelic power lay at his command, but he was still Ethan, a man forged from unlikely origins. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it armed with every bit of his old strength and the new light that now pulsed in his veins. Ethan didn't care much about labels. Strictly speaking, he wasn't just an angel hybrid. Years of cutting-edge research had fused a quantum string into his very DNA, transforming him at the molecular level. Power was power. What it was called made no difference to him. Besides, this wasn't some inherited trait. It was pure genetic modification, high-end, experimental, and entirely his own doing. Now, whenever Ethan activated his angel form, a pair of immense, luminous wings blossomed from his back, and every one of his abilities spiked into a realm of near-infinite interference. It looked spectacular, and it was. He couldn't yet say how it measured up against the greatest feats in the DC universe, let alone in more advanced realities. Half man, half angel, he wondered what doors such power might open in worlds even more extraordinary than his own. But Ethan also knew the cosmos was vast and populated by far greater forces. He'd caught glimpses of a supreme god and other nameless omnipotent beings in the Marvel universe, and the realization of his own smallness humbled him. It was why he'd always hesitated to hop between dimensions, fear that he might land among collectives of deities so formidable that even his angelic might would be dwarfed. The world finally seemed to right itself, and Diana's heart leapt when she learned that Clark was Ethan's biological brother. Ever since she was little, she dreamed of having both a younger sister and a little brother. And now, standing before tiny Ethan and Clark, she felt as if both wishes had come true. She only wished she were still a child herself, so the moment might feel a bit more fitting. Ever since Bruce's parents died, he'd hardly ever visited Ethan's home. He preferred to shut himself away in his workshop, tinkering alone with gadgets and machines. Alfred had noticed Bruce growing increasingly withdrawn and decided to do something about it. He went to Bruce's house and asked Ethan, Bruce's oldest nephew and childhood friend, to come over and help cheer him up. Alfred assumed Bruce was merely overwhelmed by grief. He never imagined there might be something more serious at work. Ethan didn't pause to question the request. He had missed his nephew and welcomed any chance to see him again. Just then, Bruce heard the front door open and called out, "Ethan?" Ethan stepped into the room where Alfred was setting out black tea and small pastries. He smiled as he caught sight of Bruce. "Hey, Bruce. Alfred said you could use a break." Bruce glanced at the neatly arranged tea tray and then back at Ethan. He offered a half-smile. "Honestly, if it weren't for Alfred promising his special black tea, I'd still be holed up in the lab." Alfred gave Bruce a gentle nod, poured the steaming tea, and set a cup in front of him. Ethan pulled up a chair, and for a moment, the chatter of machines and the weight of mourning lifted. There was only tea, companionship, and the quiet comfort of family. Chapter 410. Clark Grows Up. Bruce stood on the roof of Wayne Tower, gazing out over the city's glittering skyline. Beside him, Ethan, bright-eyed and brimming with confidence, leaned against the parapet. "What do you think of Gotham City?" Bruce asked, his tone measured. Ethan straightened. "It's fantastic, Bruce. This city is half yours, half mine, and its future belongs to us." Bruce frowned, glancing sidelong at Ethan. "That's not exactly what I meant." Shaking his head, Bruce let out a low sigh. "I'm serious, Ethan. Gotham needs to change." "Relax," Ethan replied easily. "When the time comes, the two of us will shape its future. No need to brood over it now." He offered Bruce a reassuring smile. "Honestly, you're worrying because you've got too much idle time on your hands." Bruce crossed his arms. Ethan continued, "You should devote yourself to learning, just like I have. The more you know, the less you'll waste energy on unfounded fears." "That's exactly why you're having all these grand ideas," Ethan pressed on. "If you studied as much as I do, you wouldn't have time for daydreams." Bruce shook his head firmly. "Learning is important, I agree, but knowledge alone won't reform this city. You have to think strategically about how to change Gotham, and that takes more than school books." He paused, studying Ethan. "You still have a lot to learn, kid. In the end, you and I might have to rely only on ourselves to make a real difference." Ethan met Bruce's gaze without flinching. Gotham's light stretched out before them, half-shadowed, half-illuminated, waiting for whoever was brave enough to shape its destiny. Although I knew it was futile to intervene, the kid, my little bat, had indeed sunk deep into his own paranoia. Ethan studied Bruce Wayne with quiet detachment. The caped crusader, hyper-aware of every shadow and whisper, was refusing to listen to anyone. That was why Alfred had personally requested Ethan's company this afternoon. "Master Ethan, Master Bruce, your afternoon tea," Alfred announced, setting a silver tray before them. 2 steaming cups of black tea sat alongside an assortment of delicate pastries. "Thank you, Alfred," Ethan said, lifting his cup by its handle. "Your black tea is far superior to Sebastian's." Alfred paused, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "If I may, sir?" "I'm not Alfred." Ethan froze, teacup halfway to his lips. "Forgive me?" he stammered. Of course, Alfred. My mistake." The butler inclined his head. "And Sebastian's black tea, it's adequate, but rather thin. His Tianchao blend has character, to be sure, yet its pronounced bitterness and unfamiliar notes clash with our English tastes. We typically sweeten with milk, sugar, or honey. Only the Chinese truly appreciate that subtle interplay of bitter and sweet." Ethan grinned. "I'm an exception. A robust, unadorned cup suits me just fine." Alfred allowed himself a small, approving nod. "A rare palate, sir." For a long moment, Bruce said nothing, simply watching them both. This unhurried exchange, stripped of gadgets and dire warnings, seemed to grant him a small measure of peace. And in that calm, the restless mind of Bruce Wayne found a surprising comfort in tea's simple ritual. As for Ethan, tea was his only vice. He'd never cared for cigarettes or alcohol. He didn't even drink soda. A fine brew was indulgence enough. Ethan savored only one drink in life, tea, but back then he'd made do with the cheapest brands. Now, with money no object, he could afford the rarest brews, leaves from Da Hongpao's ancient mother trees that cost millions per kilogram, or even those virtually priceless vintages whispered about in tea connoisseur circles. Such extravagance might strike an ordinary person as indulgent, but Ethan was no longer ordinary. Bruce, however, barely listened to Ethan's musings. All this talk of high-end tea meant nothing to him. Afternoon tea had always been little more than a passing fancy. Once the last morsel and sip were gone, the moment was over. Ethan studied his old rival and shook his head. "Bruce is still. I read in his own gloom," he said gravely. "What he needs isn't another fancy drink, but some good old-fashioned fun. Take him somewhere full of clowns, circuses, amusement parks, even a silly street performance, anything to shake him out of his funk." He offered the advice with surprising solemnity. After all, you can't afford to misunderstand your lifelong adversary. Clowns, Ethan explained, practice a peculiar sort of triumph. They deliberately expose their own absurdity and embarrassment in order to delight the crowd. Yet beneath the painted smiles and floppy shoes lies a darker art. By laying bare their own ugliness, clowns feed on the audience's discomfort, turning humiliation into a kind of shared victory. In cheering the clown's fallibility, the spectators unwittingly grant him the ultimate gift, control over their own emotions. In that upside-down world, Ethan knew Bruce just might find the cure to his sorrow. Ethan believed Bruce needed to study clowns, learn to understand them from the ground up, if he ever hoped to anticipate their next move. "Why clowns?" Alfred asked one evening, pouring Bruce a cup of tea. "Because clowns are the saddest people," Ethan replied quietly. "They hide their own sorrow behind a painted smile and make others laugh at their expense." Alfred nodded slowly, struck by how thoughtful Ethan had become of late. It was as if he'd tapped into some deeper well of wisdom. In the days that followed, life at the manor settled into an oddly peaceful routine. Ethan spent his mornings teasing baby Clark, darting around the nursery with a mischievous grin. But when Diana arrived, her playful goodwill had a sharper edge. The Amazon princess never hesitated to challenge Ethan's bravado. In public, she'd sweep him into a crushing embrace or pin him with an unyielding arm press, always letting him go only when the assembled company had laughed enough at his predicament. He never dared defy her. Her strength was literal, like a mountain pressing down, and under that weight, Ethan found it impossible even to speak. Despite the embarrassment, or perhaps because of it, he found the days slipping by unnoticed. Time lost all meaning. What began as a brief assignment stretched into years spent among extraordinary heroes and studying under the unlikely tutelage of the Super Seminary. All the while, Clark grew from a helpless infant into a determined young man. He was no longer the farm boy from the pages of some familiar story. Under Ethan's watchful eye, he became something new. And through every fight, every laughter-filled scolding, their bond deepened. Two brothers, not by blood, but by choice, standing together in a world that was anything but ordinary. Ethan refused to let Clark grow up a pampered heir, another wealthy layabout living off inherited fortune, so he enrolled him in an elite school from the start. Clark was already stronger than in the old timeline, thanks to years of direct sunlight charging his cells, but his true superpowers were still stirring to life. His immune system, having developed naturally rather than through genetic engineering, struggled to cope with Earth's harsher conditions. By contrast, General Zod and the other genetically modified refugees had acclimated almost instantly, mastering their powers within weeks. On the academic side, Clark's superbrain hadn't awakened yet, so he kept pace with his classmates, but never outpaced them. Ethan had no intention of turning his ward into a reclusive scholar, someone like Sun Wuhan, who never produced anything practical from all his theories. Instead, alongside literature, history, and mathematics, Clark's curriculum was anchored by two cutting-edge disciplines, materials science and energy science. Ethan believed these fields were the foundations of tomorrow's technology, and perhaps the key to a technological Superman. If Clark could one day engineer a way to neutralize kryptonite, the advantage would be decisive. For years, Clark dutifully attended lectures, ran experiments in Ethan's private labs, and pored over textbooks. One afternoon during a high-altitude flight test, he discovered just how powerful he had become. As the fuselage began to shake and crack around him, Clark realized that nothing, not even steel, could stand in his way once his abilities fully awakened. Clark's panic drove him to seek out his father and brother without a moment's hesitation. He and his older brother Ethan had grown up fatherless. Old Ethan had gently explained years ago that their mother had died and led them to her modest headstone. Since then, whenever Clark felt lost or frightened, Ethan was the only one he trusted to set things right. "Brother, something's wrong with me," Clark stammered, eyes wide as he skidded to a halt in front of Ethan. Ethan reached out to steady him. "What do you mean? Are you hurt?" Before Clark could answer, their sister Diana stepped out of the house, drawn by the commotion. She stopped short at the sight. Clark, face ashen, had lifted the family car off the ground with one hand. Tires spun in midair, grass flattened beneath his weight. "Sister Diana," Clark gasped, but the moment her eyes met his, he clamped his mouth shut. He didn't want anyone, least of all an outsider, to know what was happening to him. Chapter 4:11. Tactical Change. Diana crouched in the grass and offered Clark a warm smile. "Is there anything you feel you can't tell your sister, little Clark?" Clark's eyes widened, and he backed away. "No, I'm fine." Without another word, he turned and sprinted off. Diana glanced at Ethan, puzzled. "He grasped the truth far sooner than I expected. That may not be good for him. He still needs time to mature." Ethan folded his arms, his expression calm. "On the contrary, I want him to understand the situation right away. Better to know the facts than indulge in wild fantasies." Diana shook her head gently. "Everything has changed, Ethan. Humans now rule this world. He must learn to adapt." Ethan nodded. "All right." Silence fell between them. Diana realized these were matters of another family. She had no right to interfere further. Instead, she let her thoughts drift back to her own quest. "It's been years since I last saw Ares," she admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "Even during the war between the gods and humanity, I never crossed paths with him." She looked up at Ethan, eyes determined. "Living with you has been a blessing, but I can't forget why I left the island in the first place. Now that I've found you, my priority must return to seeking Ares." Ethan nodded in understanding. Diana's duty called her back to the search she'd postponed, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered Ares's fate. Ethan and Diana stood on the windswept cliff above the bay, the late afternoon sun gilding the horizon. Diana's eyes were distant, as if she could still feel the echo of Ares's fury rippling through the world. At last, she whispered, "Do you think Ares is truly gone? Like Zeus, dead and buried?" Ethan let out a soft sigh. "I doubt we'll ever see him again." In any case, large-scale wars among mortals have all but vanished. Now it's just scattered skirmishes. Diana's fingers curled around the railing. Ares. He kept silent about the truth, that he himself had undone the god of war, absorbing his power into his own. Yet Diana didn't need to know every detail. Before her final confrontation with Ares, she had walked the world in innocence. Slaying him forced her into a long, agonizing search for purpose, one that nearly derailed her destiny. "Princess Diana," Ethan began, watching her profile. In a few years, she would rise as Wonder Woman, the star-spangled champion of America. He respected that future hero, but in this quiet moment, he found himself cherishing the thoughtful, conflicted princess even more. He smiled at the memory of an old myth. "You know, if I'd arrived here decades earlier, I might have staked out the lighthouse at Amnesty Bay, chased off the old keeper, waited for the sea to give up its secret. Eventually, a beautiful woman would walk ashore. And well, who wouldn't want to father the next Sea King?" Diana let out a single, gentle laugh. "You always had a flair for the dramatic, Ethan." He shrugged, still grinning. "I don't think deserves all the blame. These endless conflicts spring from human greed." Diana's laugh faded to a thoughtful smile. "No," she said quietly. "Humans were fashioned by Zeus. Ares only preyed on their weaknesses." Ethan fell silent, looking out over the calm waters. In that moment, the fate of gods and mortals alike seemed to hang in perfect balance, poised between the world that was and the world she was destined to protect. Ethan watched Diana's unwavering gaze and sighed. "You believe that as long as Ares falls, all of humanity will unite." Diana pressed her chin forward, confident. "It's the only way." He shook his head. "Then how do you explain the Chinese?" Diana frowned. Ethan reached into his tunic and produced a small jade talisman carved with ancient characters. I'm a Xian, one of your so-called immortals. In my homeland, people ascend to godhood through cultivation, not by birthright from Zeus or any Olympian. Her eyes went wide. You mean mortals can train themselves into gods? Ethan gave a slow nod. We refine our chi, endure grueling trials, and transcend human limits. It's nothing like your divine heritage. It's earned through pain and perseverance. Diana's certainty wavered. In her mind, gods were born gods. The idea of cultivation shattered her worldview. Still, her pride wouldn't let her back down. Teach me this cultivation, she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. I want to become a god. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I can't. She blinked in disbelief. Why not? You're telling me I won't survive the training? He met her eyes, his expression grave. Cultivation is more than a martial art. It's a crucible that fractures body and soul before it grants power. I don't doubt your courage, but I doubt your survival. Diana's cheeks flamed with indignation. Do you understand what I'm saying? Only members of my family can practice this kind of cultivation. Ethan watched her coolly. Diana blinked, startled. You mean it's a bloodline thing? She spoke as if cultivating were some inherited right, a genetic legacy. Ethan shook his head. No, you can learn it, but only if you become part of my family. Become family? Diana echoed, confusion softening into curiosity. She stared at the young man before her, small, almost boyish, yet with eyes far older than his years. That's not impossible. Before she realized what she was doing, Diana stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ethan. Relief and triumph tangled in her gesture. She'd convinced him. But Ethan slipped out of her embrace with quiet ease, his expression polite but firm. I didn't mean that kind of relationship, Diana, he said, smoothing the front of his tunic as though reclaiming his dignity. In his mind, anything gained too readily lost its value, whether affection from a man or a woman. Diana pulled back, brow furrowed. Not that kind of relationship? She pressed her hands to her temples. Then, what deeper bond are you talking about? Ethan's gaze was cold and unyielding as he addressed Diana. We stand together as one family, he began. If you truly seek the path to godhood, you must join the Ethan house and never betray us. Even if your loyalties pull you back to Paradise Island, you will defend our cause. Diana's emerald eyes flashed. That's impossible. I could never turn against my home. Ethan's expression didn't change. Then there is no road for you. She straightened her shoulders. Unless, he pressed, a faint smile tugging at his lips, unless you swear yourself to me. Diana's tone turned regal. You may ask that of me when you can back it up with strength. A derisive laugh escaped Ethan. I'm only a mortal. You're a goddess. How could I ever become more powerful than you? Without another word, Diana turned and walked away, disappointment etched on her face. In the boardroom of the Ethan Corporation, the senior Ethan, gray at the temples but still sharp as ever, rose to unveil Project Watt. He outlined his grand vision, using advanced biotechnology and cybernetics to create a new generation of superhumans, ushering in an era of accelerated evolution. Under this pioneering initiative, the Ethan family would secure its place as Earth's future titans. Behind the polished presentations and lofty rhetoric, of course, lay a simpler ambition, to build a Vought-style enterprise in Washington, D.C., one that would give the Ethans unrivaled influence over the superhuman landscape. For years, Ethan has unleashed wave after wave of devastating superpowered terrorist attacks on the Marvel Universe, each one a deliberate challenge designed to forge Earth's defenders into something stronger. Like a body repeatedly exposed to a ruthless virus, humanity and its heroes adapted, evolving new strategies and abilities in response to every assault. Now, convinced that the DC Universe requires the same crucible, Ethan is ready to roll out his next experiment. He plans to breach the dimensional barrier and launch a Saiyan invasion of DC Earth, enlisting Vegeta and his fellow warriors as his spearhead. By watching how Gotham, Metropolis, and the rest of that LD respond, Ethan will gather invaluable data on their defenses and learn exactly how to break them. Only after the Saiyans have tested DC's mettle will he execute the second phase of his master plan, importing Kryptonians into the Marvel Universe to deliver the ultimate counterstrike. In Ethan's eyes, Only through these ruthless rehearsals can either Earth hope to survive the true threats that lie ahead, from Kryptonian tyrants to the hellish armies of Apocalypse. Chapter 412, Superman Corporation, Deceiving All Mankind. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the massive logo lighting up the conference room wall. Vought Corporation. No, Superman Corporation. He'd originally intended to resurrect his old venture as the Imperial Company, but the world had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. To stay ahead, he needed a name the public would remember. Superman fit the bill. Before the Man of Steel took center stage, the word Superman hadn't meant much beyond science fiction cliches. And anyway, there had already been a consumer brand called Supernasha. Ethan divided his true scheme into several discrete phases, each to unfold over the next few years. But Phase 1, his grand advertising blitz, could start right now. On every billboard, in every newspaper, online and on television, calling all superhumans, join the first-ever Superman Corporation. Within days, the slogan was impossible to ignore. That's when Diana, Bruce, and Clark came knocking on Ethan's office door. He wasn't surprised to see them. Forming an alliance of superpowered souls was precisely what his campaign was designed to provoke. Diana crossed her arms and fixed him with a curious stare. "Ethan, are you really planning to reveal yourself?" she asked. "You want to gather every superhuman you can find?" Bruce stepped forward, concern in his eyes. "You know people like us don't just show up on call. What's your angle?" Clark's expression was tight. "This advertising campaign seems too ambitious. What exactly do you have in mind?" Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "I'm building something unprecedented, a company run by superhumans for superhumans. Think of it as a mutual aid network, a way to channel our abilities into something profitable." Diana shook her head. "You and I aren't human, Ethan. We're gods among mortals, and you're the same." Her tone was both amused and wary. "What makes you think superhumans will sign up to work for a corporation, even one you founded?" He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Because, Diana, the world is changing fast. Governments will want our powers on retainer. Militaries will want us under contract. A private enterprise offers more freedom and better pay than any state will ever dare to promise. I intend to corner that market." Clark exchanged a look with Bruce, then turned back to Ethan. "We'll be watching you. If this goes sideways, you know where to find us." Ethan nodded. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As they departed, he felt the first real spark of excitement. His public facade was up, and already the world was biting. Phase 1 was accomplished. The game, as they say, was on. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the lamplight dancing across his features. "Relax, Diana," he said quietly. "I'm not suggesting we blow our cover. What I have in mind is far more subtle and far more powerful. We let humanity know there are beings like us, divine, extraordinary, and in doing so, we shape the way they think. We become their gods, their guiding myth." Diana's brow furrowed. Sharp and analytical as she was, she felt a twinge of doubt. "I don't follow. How would that be any different from simply revealing ourselves? Won't they panic?" Ethan's smile was calm, almost patient. "That's the genius of it. We've spent centuries hiding, convinced humans could never accept the truth. But what if, instead, we present our abilities as innate gifts, God-given, part of their own evolution? We plant the idea that superhumans are real, then let it grow. Once the concept takes root, humans will adapt their worldview. They'll learn to revere us. They'll even welcome us." Diana paused, weighing his words. He was proposing to normalize superhumans, to integrate them so seamlessly that society would believe the extraordinary was simply natural. Could that really work? "Of course it can," Ethan continued, his tone soft but certain. "Human lives are short, and their minds are malleable. Education shapes culture. Without guidance, speculation, and fear fill the void. But with the right narrative, people will accept whatever we teach them." He glanced at Diana, reading her hesitation. She thought of her own journey, the years she'd spent studying, honing her powers under the strictest tutelage. Without that training, she wouldn't be standing here today. Silence settled between them, thick with possibility, and with the weight of the future they were about to write. "In at most 2 generations, humans will be ready to accept the existence of superhumans," Ethan said, his tone calm and certain. "At that point, we'll no longer have to hide. We can walk among them openly and claim the admiration they naturally reserve for strength. Diana frowned. His argument was specious. Anyone else making it would have sounded ridiculous, but Diana trusted Ethan, so she found herself believing. She looked at him, voice low. Will you need my help next? Ethan shook his head. Not just yet. First, I want to groom someone from back home with my own hands. He paused, considering. It doesn't have to be Clark. Anyone, a fellow countryman, will do. Humans won't embrace superhumans overnight. Either they grow accustomed to us, or they have to suffer because of enough reckless or malicious superhumans that they learn to rely on, and eventually worship, the ones who use their powers for good. He leaned back, eyes distant. That's how you build support. Let the villains run wild long enough, and people will beg for saviors. Even in places like the Black Robe Pickets, where supervillain attacks are rare, the idea of venerating strength can take root if you plant it carefully. The government has been forced into concessions to preserve the delicate balance of power. Without them, Vought Corporation would never have gained even provisional approval to join the Ministry of National Defense. An unacceptable risk if any outside group could wield a nation's military might. Ethan, however, has made a breakthrough. He's located a child in this world whose very existence mirrors that of his homeland's greatest champion. His plan is simple in theory. Stage an accident in a deserted alley, trigger the boy's latent superpowers, then maneuver the legal system to secure his custody. Once he's officially the boy's guardian, Ethan can install him as the public face of Superman Company and seize control of the ultimate asset. Clearly, my first attempt at a car crash was too mild, Ethan admitted, staring down the narrow passageway. A tighter alley should give us the drama we need. Later, Bruce confronted him. The flamboyant ads for Superman Company had piqued his curiosity and his skepticism. Could Ethan really pull this off? Not that he doubted Ethan's ambition. Ethan's older self had orchestrated schemes far more audacious in a previous life. But the Ethan standing before him now was young, untested, and about to prove that even brilliance can be deceptively youthful. Ethan closed the door behind him and let out a slow breath. Earlier, Bruce Wayne had cornered him with thinly veiled accusations, fishing for any tidbit about superhumans. But Ethan had learned long ago not to share more than necessary, especially not with Bruce. He'd kept his secrets, and now Clark Kent stood on the threshold, worry etched across his face. Ethan, Clark said, voice tight, I need to know. Am I one of those superhumans you mentioned? Clark looked drained and frightened. After all, Ethan's regimen of 4 hours of sunlight each day had kicked Clark's development into overdrive. He'd shot up years in mere months. No wonder Clark felt like a freak. Ethan gestured him inside. Sit down, Clark. Take a deep breath. Clark sank onto the couch, hands trembling. I saw that ad, the Superman Company. It all fits. My strength, my speed. Am I really? You're not a freak, Ethan said gently. Superhumans aren't aliens. They're an offshoot of human evolution, a new branch. Think of it as humanity's next step. A lot of people out there are waking up to abilities like yours. Clark swallowed. Then why me? Why am I the only one who's special? Ethan studied him, choosing his words carefully. You're not the only one in the world, nor the only one in our family, but your gifts showed up early and stronger than most. That's why it felt so overwhelming. Clark ran a hand through his hair, relief and doubt warring in his eyes. You mean there are others in the family who? Ethan nodded. A few. They're spread out, living normal lives, laying low. When the time comes, they'll step forward, just like you will. Right now, I want you to focus on mastering what you've got. Clark sat back, the tension in his shoulders easing. I still don't know what to do next. Start small, Ethan advised. Learn your limits. Control your strength. We'll train you, one step at a time, and I'll be here to guide you. Clark managed a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Ethan. I feel better already. Ethan returned the smile. Good, because once you understand what you are, you'll see it's not a curse, it's a gift, and you're not alone. Ethan, is that really you? Clark's heart leapt as Ethan, a boy around his age, slowly lifted himself off the ground, legs dangling beneath him. The afternoon sun caught the gleam in his eyes, and for a moment he hovered there, as if testing the air. You can fly? Clark blurted, his voice trembling with excitement. Ethan's grin widened. I think so. Then, with a flick of his arms, he drifted a little higher. Clark stared, utterly amazed, and also a little envious. He couldn't do that. All he'd ever managed was a bit more speed and strength than the other kids. Gathering himself, he said, "Dad always told me our family carries superhuman genes. He said every generation might awaken with a power of their own." Ethan glanced down at him, curiosity dancing in his eyes. "What about Dad? Did he ever awaken?" "No," Clark replied, shaking his head. Relief and something like companionship warmed his chest. "None of Dad's friends ever did either. I never expected you to wake up with powers either." Ethan hovered there a moment, absorbing the thought. Then he asked quietly, "So you awakened long ago?" "When you were born," Clark admitted. "A few months back. I just didn't have anyone to talk to about it." Ethan's laughter was soft. "So what do you do exactly?" Clark puffed out his chest, proud now to share. "I absorb energy. I can draw power from anything. Light, heat, electricity, and then use it, like supercharged punches or bursts of strength." Ethan fluttered in place, eyes wide. "Absorb energy? How does that work?" Clark paused, trying to explain something he still felt was a little mysterious himself. "It's weird. I just focus on whatever energy source is around me. It flows into me, and I can release it however I want. Sometimes I don't even notice it until I need it." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, still floating a few feet off the ground. "That is incredible." As the two boys drifted there in the late afternoon light, a sudden sense of belonging settled over both of them. For the first time, Clark wasn't the only superpowered kid around, and Ethan, it seemed, felt the same. Together, they would learn what these gifts really meant. Chapter 413, Planning. The ability to absorb energy comes in two forms, active and passive. Ethan leaned back in his chair, reciting the same story he'd told Clark a dozen times before. Active absorption lets me draw in kinetic force, radiation, fire, anything energetic, and channel it into my own strength. Passive absorption works much the same way, only it happens automatically, without conscious effort. Since I woke up with this power, nothing's been able to hurt me. Clark's eyes went wide. "So you're invincible?" Ethan shook his head. "Not quite. Every ability has its limits. Right now, I can only take in the energy of a single tank shell from its main gun before I'm completely saturated. If I keep getting hit after that, I start taking real damage, bones break, muscles tear, unless I dump the stored energy or use it to reinforce my body." Clark let out a low whistle. "That's incredible. I mean, catching a tank shell with your bare hands. You're not even 8 years old yet." Ethan shrugged, offering a casual grin. "I wouldn't recommend trying it yourself." Clark shook his head in awe. "I thought I was tough. I'm a superhuman, an evolver, after all. But that's on another level." Ethan tapped his fingers on the table. "My own ability barely registered at first. I had to train to control it, to expand the threshold bit by bit. Now we have to figure out how to apply it to our mission. If I can absorb and redirect enough incoming firepower, we might just have a chance." Clark nodded, leaning forward. "All right, let's plan it out." They bent over the map, side by side, two very different strengths, united by a single goal. "Don't be discouraged, Clark," Ethan said, offering a reassuring smile. "Evolvers' powers aren't fixed. They grow along with us. Think about it. An ordinary person can get stronger through training, and it's the same for us. Our abilities are just our inborn talents, waiting to be developed." Clark sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I know, Ethan, but I still can't picture what I'll be capable of once my powers mature. I mean, really mature." He tried to laugh it off. "Like super strong? Because I already feel pretty super." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Then why can you fly?" Ethan asked, leaning back against the railing. Clark paused, considering the question. "If my gift were simply energy absorption and release, I'd still be stuck walking everywhere. The real core of my power is belief, absolute conviction. If I firmly convince myself that I'm indestructible, then I become indestructible. The only thing holding me back is my own self-doubt. So flying? It's actually the easiest trick in my book." Ethan let out a low whistle. Clark's eyes flashed bright with pride and a hint of envy as he watched his friend's reaction. Ethan had always believed his energy absorption ability was incredible, but nothing prepared him for the power of pure conviction. Could simply believing himself indestructible actually make him so? Witnessing Ethan's feat, left Clark completely deflated. The excitement he'd felt at discovering another evolver like himself vanished in an instant. He'd imagined that all evolvers shared the same basic gifts, but the truth was harsher. Some were ordinary evolvers, Clark's lot, and others, like Ethan, were super evolvers. What hope did he have, even if his own strength continued to grow? With a resigned shake of his head, Clark let out a long, defeated sigh. Meanwhile, Bruce walked back to his apartment without the answers he'd been searching for. He dropped onto his couch, flicked on the TV, and tuned in to the familiar primetime commercial. Humans are evolving. A unique, special group is emerging. The next step in our species. Superhumans. I call them evolvers. Ethan stared at the glowing billboard in disbelief. Superman Corporation, uniting superhumans to forge the next stage of human evolution. Below the slogan, a video looped relentlessly, people soaring into the stratosphere, thunderbolts crackling around their outstretched hands, jets of flame scorching barren Earth. In a nation where 10% of the population hadn't even seen a computer, let alone touched a PlayStation, such imagery was impossible to fake. It was living proof of a new breed of humanity. Evolvers, they called themselves. Superhumans. He leaned back, mind racing. If these evolvers truly existed, everything he thought he knew about the world would have to change. Science, politics, power, it all hinged on the limits of human capability. And now those limits were being obliterated before his eyes. A wave of unease washed over him. What if these gifted individuals grew beyond anyone's control? What if their newfound abilities tipped the balance of society, unleashed conflicts no government or army could contain? Ethan shook off the rising panic. His purpose remained unchanged. Whether these superhumans emerged as saviors or threats, they would not be allowed to run wild. He pressed his fingers to the desk, determination hardening in his chest. If Superman Corporation really planned to shepherd humanity's evolution, someone had to watch over their flock, and if necessary, rein them in. Because in a world where miracles had just become reality, oversight wasn't optional. It was essential. Bruce knew what he had to do. Evolved beings and superhumans already walked the earth, and if left unchecked, they could spiral out of control, wreaking havoc without remorse. He needed detailed intelligence on their origins, powers, and vulnerabilities so that when the time came, he could neutralize any threat before it escalated beyond repair. The clearest path to that knowledge led him to the offices of Superman Company. It was, to Bruce's mind, the single most comprehensive archive of meta-human research in existence. But there was a catch. Even the company's founder, Ethan, seemed to guard his data closely. Publicly, Ethan was a genial visionary. Behind closed doors, he carefully curated what information he released. What Bruce didn't know was that Ethan had no desire to withhold the truth. In fact, he was preparing to unveil a complete roster of the first generation of superheroes, their biographies, their powers, even the laboratory tests that defined their limits. Once Bruce saw that collection, he would have precisely what he needed. Of course, history shows that where heroes rise, villains are never far behind. The inaugural crop of supervillains would emerge from society's fringes, petty gangsters, bullies, and drifters who suddenly discovered they were unstoppable. Uneducated and greedy, they would flaunt their new abilities, resorting to robbery and violence for quick gain, convinced they were above the law. The DC universe has never lacked for such menaces. The only question was which one would surface first. Bruce's gaze hardened. He would gain Ethan's trust, unlock Superman Company's secrets, and assemble a contingency plan, no matter what it took. The world's next great battle was looming, and he intended to be ready. Ethan checked his radio, frowning at the dispatcher's clipped voice. NYPD units, we have a bank robbery in progress at the intersection of Queens Boulevard and Main Street. Suspect is believed to be armed. Proceed with caution. He and his partner, Detective Ramirez, peeled out in their squad car, and a siren wailing through mid-morning traffic. Bank holdups were so routine in New York City that most officers treated them like a daily annoyance, until something went terribly wrong. When they arrived, uniformed patrolmen had already formed a loose perimeter around a lone man standing in front of the bank's main doors. He wore a cheap cotton shirt, dark jeans, and, most obviously, no mask. Ethan's heart skipped. No robber left his face exposed on purpose. "Step away from the doors," one officer shouted. hand hovering over his holster. The suspect, stocky, sunburned, unmistakably of Mexican descent, leaned back on one foot and laughed. "Get out of my way, you stinky cops! I just want my money!" Ethan slid out of the car, badge in hand. Officers in New York had seen every flavor of lunatic. I see. Every get-rich-quick crook, and they'd faced worse in Florida too. But something about this felt different. The man's confidence was almost theatrical, as if he were expecting an audience. As Ethan approached, his partner murmured, "He's not afraid to die, and he's not messing around." Ethan squared his shoulders. "Nobody has to get hurt today. Drop the bag. Empty your hands." The robber's grin stretched wider, eyes darting from Ethan's face to the holstered weapon. Then, in a voice too calm to be sane, he said, "Too late for that." And with those words, Ethan had a sickening sense that they were about to discover just how right, or wrong, they'd been about this routine call. Ethan watched in disbelief as the man unleashed a fireball from his mouth. The blast went off like a high-explosive grenade, tearing through the squad. 3 officers, caught completely off guard, died instantly, and 2 more were left grievously wounded. By the time Ethan keyed his radio for backup, a sniper had already crept into position. One precise shot to the forehead, and the threat was over. Ethan couldn't help but admire the man's audacity. Granted, he'd just discovered a pyrokinetic ability powerful enough to level a building, but he hadn't even bothered to don bulletproof armor before facing down armed police. What was he thinking? Recklessness like that was a deadly kind of ignorance. Chapter 414, Training Clark Knight pressed down over Gotham like an iron lid, and Ethan stood on his private rooftop helipad, eyes sweeping the city's jagged skyline. He'd made sure that Clark, in truth a son of Krypton, would be reborn here, raised in Gotham's darkness. With every punch, every ray of solar-charged energy, this new Superboy would tear apart the clouds that smothered the city. After all, no fortress can stand when relentless force is applied. Gotham's own Superman, Ethan murmured with satisfaction. Below him moved a familiar silhouette, Robin, Gotham's smallest but most relentless bat signal. Using his cover as an ally of the family, the boy had slipped a bug into Ethan's own jacket pocket during their last conversation. Impressive mobility, surgical precision, especially for someone who hadn't even begun his world-spanning training tour. Ethan allowed himself a thin smile. Robin's dossier on superhumans was exhaustive: autopsy reports, genetic scans, mission logs, every scrap of data. Yet the boy still believed he could master the world's greatest threats without ever leaving Gotham. Innocent arrogance. It would cost him, though Ethan intended to make it worth his while. Whatever skills Robin lacked, he would gain them 10 times over. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, Ethan's full attention belonged to one mission: forging Clark into the hero Gotham desperately needed. It was time to begin. "Clark, people fear what they don't understand. We need to show them exactly what we're capable of," Ethan said, fixing his younger brother with a steely gaze. "I understand, Ethan," Clark replied, trying to sound confident, but his voice wavered. Ethan's fist shot out, knocking Clark to the ground. "Speak up, Clark. Why do you sound like such a coward? There are more super-terrorist attacks around the world every day. Someday, you'll be the one on the front lines. Do you really think that timid little voice and a weak punch will stop them?" There was no malice in Ethan's tone, only righteous intensity, as if he were preparing a hero for battle, not bullying a brother. Clark looked up at him with admiration rather than resentment. From an early age, Clark had been molded by the combined efforts of Ethan and their father. Their relentless training had twisted his thoughts and values. Their father had told him he was the pride of the family and should always look up to Ethan as his role model, while Ethan himself laid down strict rules about what Clark was allowed or forbidden to do. This soldier-style upbringing had become Clark's invisible chain, shaping his every belief. "Yes, Ethan," Clark said through gritted teeth, forcing himself to his feet once more. Although each blast drove agonizing pain through his body, Clark endured every strike for one reason alone: the promise of his mentor's approval. Mr. Ethan, normally as stern and unyielding as an iceberg, reserved his rarest praise for moments like these, and Clark cherished every word. Boom, boom, boom. Gotham's skies had long since given up the sun, remaining perpetually gray and rain-soaked. To compensate, Ethan had set up a powerful yellow sun lamp in the warehouse, ensuring Clark could absorb the solar energy he needed to fuel his powers. The thunderous explosions echoing off the walls weren't from a storm, but from the raw superhuman force rippling through Clark's body. Ethan stood unmoving as shockwaves shredded through crates and twisted steel beams. Clark's strength was overwhelming. No armor could withstand it, and in truth, he needed none. With each punishing blow, Clark cradled his head and curled into a crouch, doing his best to protect himself. Yet he refused to yield. Every time his vision blurred and his knees trembled, Clark lifted his eyes to find Ethan Sr.'s expression. A brief flash of pride, a satisfied nod, those were the moments Clark lived for. At each flicker of approval, he felt a surge of power he hadn't known he possessed, as if Ethan's belief in him became its own source of strength. He would not give up, not while a single look of recognition from his mentor could make all the pain worthwhile. "Make him stronger," Ethan ordered. It wasn't Clark's imagination. Every time Ethan pummeled Clark, the Kryptonian cells seemed to spark to life, voraciously absorbing sunlight and reinforcing themselves. With each blow, Clark's power surged, new abilities flared into existence, as if the more he was beaten, the stronger he became. Whether it was the birthright of a true Kryptonian or Clark's own latent talent, the result was the same: exponential growth. Clark felt it in his bones. His muscles swelled with super strength, his reflexes blurred into super speed, his flesh hardened into living steel, and a biological force field shimmered around him. His lungs drew in air with unmatched efficiency, and his senses sharpened to a superhuman edge. Among all evolvers, he was no longer just another powered individual. He was a phenomenon. Ethan himself admitted it. Super strength, super speed, a steel-like body, a bioforce field, super breathing, heightened senses. You're the ultimate super soldier. From now on, we'll call you Almighty Man. Clark cracked a crooked grin and shook his head. The title felt too grandiose. "Thanks," he said, voice low but amused, "but just call me Clark." Ethan stood in the clearing, his palms glowing with a faint golden light as he absorbed the frigid breeze swirling around him. With a subtle shift in his aura, the cold wind condensed, then transformed into a gentle warmth that radiated through the trees, thawing brittle branches and frosting over patches of ice. He glanced over at Clark with a confident smile. "See?" Ethan said, cupping his hands to release the heat. "That's one way to convert energy from one form to another." Clark's jaw dropped. He'd trained beside Ethan for months, wrestling with the same biological force field technique, yet he'd never managed anything close to this. A bubbling excitement rose in his chest, so intense that his heartbeat thundered in his ears. Before Ethan could say another word, Clark felt a surge of power explode through him. His energy field flared uncontrollably, and with a thunderous crack, he shot upward, blasting a hole through the clearing's wooden roof. Then, astonishingly, he stopped midair, suspended as if an invisible hand held him aloft. Ethan's eyes widened. "Clark, you're flying!" Clark looked down at his outstretched arms in awe. A grin split his face, equal parts shock and triumph. All those hours of training, all the envy he'd felt when Ethan drifted overhead, had finally paid off. His friend had warned him. Flight was a side effect of mastering the biological force field, not the primary goal. But now, drifting gently on the breeze, Clark didn't care about goals, just the freedom of soaring at last. Ethan folded his arms and rose effortlessly into the air. "You saw what I did back there. I neutralized gravity itself. You've still got a lot of catching up to do, Clark." Clark braced himself, determination lighting his eyes. "I know, Ethan, but mark my words, I'm going to reach your level." He shot forward, exhilarated by the thought that he might one day stand on equal footing with his older brother. Even if he only managed to match Ethan in one small way, it would be a victory he'd cherish. Ethan hovered, fixing Clark with a proud, steady gaze. "Remember why we came here, Clark. Our arrival in this world carries a purpose. We're meant to be a beacon, a symbol that evolver or human makes no difference. We're all part of the same human family." Clark flushed at the words. He hadn't yet entered that tumultuous, rebellious phase of youth, so he accepted Ethan's vision as gospel. Nodding eagerly, he braced himself for whatever challenges lay ahead, determined to prove that together they could change the world. Chapter 415, Little Bat Debuts. Ethan's expression turned serious as he faced Clark. This path won't be easy. If we choose to become a symbol, a guiding light, we must be prepared for relentless criticism. One day, through your studies, you'll come to understand how complex human beings really are. And that doesn't mean everyone is good. He paused, then continued quietly. I owe you an explanation for why my family, the Ethans, never stepped forward as icons. No, as superheroes, until now. For years, we watched humanity from the shadows. We wanted to be sure before we acted. Then the superpowered terrorist attacks started to escalate. At that point, we realized we couldn't stay hidden any longer. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. People are naturally fearful of what they don't understand. Because we're different, they'll misjudge us, even hate us. They'll call us monsters or aliens. Governments will grow suspicious, and the masses will push us away. Clark frowned, struggling to reconcile Ethan's words. But why? He asked. We're trying to help them. Ethan gave a wry, sad smile. Exactly, we mean well, but good intentions alone don't stop fear from taking hold. As long as people refuse to understand one another, even our best intentions will look self-serving, Ethan said. We just want to step forward openly. So our only choice is to become heroes? Clark asked, confusion coloring his tone. Ethan shook his head. It's not a personal choice. It's what this world needs. There are evolvers who do whatever they please, trampling on others' happiness for selfish gain. We exist to stop them. He gave Clark a reassuring pat on the shoulder as they floated down to solid ground. The moment their feet touched the pavement, Clark's mind buzzed with ideas about a costume and a code name. Ethan had explained that the goal was to make superheroes part of everyday culture again, maybe even spark a new trend, like the old Invincible Young Man comics. But he knew ordinary people would never welcome a band of superpowered strangers smashing through buildings at will. Then again, if the world could only rely on beings like them, would Earth turn into a constant superhero showcase? Training remained their priority, of course. Ethan made that clear. Yet at 14, Clark couldn't help but thrill at the thought of designing his own uniform and picking a name that would capture imaginations. He glanced at Ethan, who carried the calm assurance of someone with years of experience. He thought of Bruce, Ethan's first protégé, who had always taken his duties seriously and shunned the spotlight. Clark pressed his lips together, excitement and nervousness warring inside him. He had a lot to decide and a world to protect. Ethan spends his days studying every known countermeasure against superhumans, endlessly replaying footage of powered individuals in action. Thankfully, as superpowered terrorist incidents have become more frequent, the government's once strict information blackout has relaxed. At the same time, the first generation of superheroes has stepped onto the scene. Backed by the Ethan family's vast resources and bolstered by the military-industrial complex and even the medical establishment, these heroes have taken down supercriminals that conventional agencies simply can't handle. Even Wall Street's most powerful financiers had no choice but to bend the knee. Today, in this self-styled land of the free, Superman Inc. and its champions enjoy nothing but adulation. Any hint of skepticism is instantly treated as a threat. The FBI, CIA, or local police will swoop in to investigate you for suspicious behavior. Labeling critics as antisocial personalities is easy. At worst, dissenters end up in psychiatric wards. And if anyone dares suggest that a hero could be a danger or a terrorist, their fate is far more grim. Ethan's eyes flicked over the grim facade of the maximum security detention center, a fortress reserved for the worst of the worst, murderers, warlords, and most terrifying of all, those suspected of being aliens. Within these walls, violence was routine, death was never far away, and oversight from the outside world might as well not exist. Here, anyone accused of extraterrestrial origins faced immediate dissection. If the suspicions proved unfounded, the authorities would issue a perfunctory apology and sweep the mistake under the rug. But few cared about formalities once blood had been drawn. As heroic vigilantes began to assert their presence, public opinion polarized. Superheroes, after all, promised swift justice where police forces had repeatedly failed. Ordinary citizens, already shaken by high-profile supervillain attacks, clamored for protection. Dissenters existed only in hushed conversations behind closed doors. No one dared challenge the new order on social media or at a town hall meeting. Clark, still brimming with youthful idealism, had no inkling of the dark undercurrent fueling this trend. All he saw were capes and courage, and he longed to don one himself. Beside him stood another recruit chosen by Ethan, a native boy whose fate had been sealed the night of the alleyway incident. When the shadows closed in on him that evening, something deep within awakened. He'd emerged an evolver, discovering latent powers he barely understood. Now, Clark and his newfound comrade trained under Ethan's watchful eye, both aching to prove their worth. They knew the risks. Ethan had made that clear. But the promise of protecting the helpless, of striking fear into the hearts of criminals and aliens alike, was too powerful to resist. In a world teetering on the edge, two young hopefuls prepared to step into the fray, determined to become the heroes Earth demanded. Ethan didn't hesitate when the Superman Company offered to adopt him. He knew that, otherwise, he'd end up in an orphanage with no hope of ever becoming more than a forgotten face. By signing on with the company, he could train under real heroes, and maybe one day become one himself. Watching the heroes of the motherland develop under his guidance, Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction. He'd subtly tweaked their training programs and public personas to sharpen their vanity and ambition, to encourage them to embody the true spirit of motherland heroes while pruning away any needless quirks or distractions. All of it, he knew, would pay off spectacularly when they finally faced Clark in the arena of public opinion and sheer power. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's protégés, Little Bat and Superboy, grew stronger, faster, and more confident. To his surprise, Little Bat even made a public debut before setting off to study under the legendary Ninja Master. Gotham City buzzed with rumors of a new Batman, described as a tall, agile figure who wore stylized cat ears. If the idea of superpowered vigilantes hadn't already taken root in people's minds, this lanky, fanged silhouette prowling the rooftops would have become nothing short of a terrifying urban legend, just like the tiny bat that first haunted Gotham's alleys. In today's world, where superhero culture reigns supreme, going maskless has become the norm. Bruce frowned as he regarded Ethan's appearance. Chapter 416, The Naive Little Bat. Under the flickering glow of Gotham's street lamps, two figures faced each other in tense silence. One wore a gleaming white suit of light armor, the plates locking neatly at his torso, shoulders, and shins. Flexible fabric at the joints let him move without restriction. Atop his head sat a polished white helmet crowned by a single spiraling horn, and behind him fluttered a pure white cape. Hands planted firmly on his hips, he announced himself with unwavering confidence. "I am Ethan, the Light Knight of Gotham City. State your name and explain why you've come to my city." His challenger emerged from the shadows in dark, streamlined armor. The cowl over his head left only his eyes visible, two sharp points cutting through the gloom. When he spoke, a gravelly rasp rattled in the air, clearly the work of a voice modulator engineered to conceal his true tones. "You're the one who should be asking questions," he replied. "I'm Gotham's Dark Knight, and this city is mine by birthright." Ethan's jaw clenched at the defiance in that rasping voice. "Boy," he said coolly, "you're standing on my turf." His cape billowed in the sudden breeze as he squared his shoulders, prepared for whatever came next. But the Dark Knight remained motionless, watching him with those unblinking eyes behind the mask. In that charged standoff beneath the dim lights, Gotham's newest emblem of light met its shadowy counterpart. Neither spoke again, yet each knew this encounter would mark the beginning of something far larger than a simple clash of rival vigilantes. It was the dawn of a conflict that would test both their wills and the very soul of Gotham itself. Ethan stood on the rooftop's edge, moonlight glinting off the polished crescents on his suit. Across from him, the young vigilante known as Little Bat balanced on a gargoyle's head, cloak flapping in the night breeze. "If you really want to enforce justice," Little Bat called out, voice ringing clear, "you'll ditch the hood and mask so I can see your face." Ethan shrugged, the brim of his fedora dipping over his eyes. "Go ahead and try it yourself," he shot back. "I have a hunch you're more criminal than crime fighter." Little Bat bristled but refused to unmask. Ethan simply tipped his hat and, with a flick of his wrist, sent a slender, crescent-shaped dart arcing across the rooftop toward him. The dart gleamed silver in the moonlight, ominously familiar to the young hero. Reacting on instinct, Little Bat rolled to one side, narrowly evading the blade's path. His lightweight, bullet-resistant suit absorbed the breeze of its passing, but he wasn't about to stand still and wait for round two. He sprang to his feet, muscles coiling, then crackle. Electricity sizzled along his gauntlets. In one fluid motion, Little Bat unleashed a volley of blue-white lightning toward Ethan, the bolts dancing across the stone like vengeful wraiths. Ethan's eyes flashed beneath his cowl. Tonight, this rooftop would decide whose brand of justice would prevail. Ethan didn't give his opponent a chance to react. He tossed a crescent-shaped dart that landed with a soft thunk before detonating into a dense gray smoke. The chemical charge inside was no ordinary smokescreen. It crackled with electricity. Rookie Little Bat was caught completely off guard. As the shockwave rippled through him, his limbs locked up, and he crumpled to the ground in spasms. Ethan's laughter rang out, sharp, triumphant. Through the swirling haze, Little Bat's pupils fluttered. Every instinct screamed that he shouldn't move. Yet by sheer force of will, he fought through the paralysis. Two on-site physicists, monitoring the fight, yelled, "Superman!" Before the words had even died away, Ethan brought down a reinforced iron boot onto the spot where Little Bat had just stood. The concrete floor shattered in a spiderweb of cracks. Blinded by the acrid fog, and lacking any advanced optics in his bat-themed helmet, Little Bat stumbled, coughing. His suit had no night vision, no thermal imager, no sonar, not even a per gas filter. The stench of burned chemicals filled his lungs, and he gagged. As he tried desperately to locate Ethan's next move, a blur of white armor shot through the smoke. Ethan's gauntleted fist struck Little Bat's midsection with bone-jarring force. The blow nearly punched clean through his synthetic muscle suit, but once again, Little Bat summoned every shred of resolve to hold on. For a tense moment, the two combatants froze, Ethan poised to press his advantage, Little Bat gritting his teeth against the pain. The shattered concrete and swirling smoke made it impossible to tell who would move first. But one thing was certain, Ethan had seized control of the fight. Ethan curled up on the concrete, crawling into the far corner as humiliation burned in his cheeks. Batman's true gift was slipping away. He even outpaced the Flash when he wanted to. Time and again, foes would wriggle free of his grasp, only to be savaged by the Dark Knight's return blow. Clearly, the young Bat had yet to develop much tactical sense. "I've got smoke bombs deployed," the kid announced, voice echoing off the warehouse walls. "Let's see if you can still track me." Ethan met that challenge with a shaky grin. "Go ahead and try." In an instant, the boy sprang forward, delivering a brutal kick that sent Ethan flying across the floor. He crashed into the brick wall with a thunderous crack, fissures spiderwebbed through the mortar. Pain flared through every bone, but sheer will drove him to his feet. He yanked out his grappling gun, fired the cable up toward the rafters, and swung himself upright. "Unbelievable," Ethan rasped, wincing as he flexed a protesting shoulder. "Even half broken, you don't quit." Above him, the young Bat vanished into the night sky, smoke curling in his wake. Ethan watched him go, mind racing. Where was he headed now? And when the Bat returned, what fresh torment would he unleash? Ethan's recent exploits had everyone talking. Time and again, he'd pushed himself past normal human limits, proof of a will so strong it left even Alfred in awe. There was no doubt in Alfred's mind. Ethan was cut from a different cloth. A small light blinked on Ethan's wrist, and minutes later, Alfred pulled up in the old sedan everyone joked was worthless. He hopped out and hurried around to open the passenger door. "Master Ethan, are you hurt? You look." "I'll survive," Ethan interrupted, settling into the seat and loosening his torn muscle-weave suit. "I ran into a new costumed hero tonight. Goes by Aurora. She's collecting intel on Gotham's Bright Knight. I need you to scour every Wayne Enterprises database for files on him." Alfred flinched at the suggestion. "Sir, please. This is far too dangerous. You shouldn't be out there facing supercriminals solo. Let the heroes handle it." Ethan met Alfred's concerned gaze, his own determination glittering in the dim dashboard light. "Alfred, the so-called heroes aren't enough. Gotham's been stuck in the same vicious cycle for years. If nobody's willing to shake things up, I will." He peeled off the shattered remnants of his suit and began cleaning and dressing the deeper cuts himself. Alfred hated every moment of it, torn between his duty to protect Ethan and respect for the young man's unbreakable resolve. At last, Alfred sighed. "Very well, Master Ethan. I'll have the medical kit ready and keep all our systems on lockdown, but promise me you'll call if you need support." Ethan offered a small, wry smile. "I'll hold you to that. For now, let's find out just who this bright knight really is." Chapter 7. The Suit's Weakness. Ethan Wayne, known to the city as the Dark Sentinel, had earned a reputation for being unnervingly vigilant, some might even say paranoid. In the quiet hum of Wayne Manor's underground workshop, Alfred Pennyworth let out a weary sigh. He had watched Ethan grow from a brooding orphan into a driven crusader, but that bond still rested on the etiquette of master and servant. He couldn't simply order Ethan to stand down. "Alfred," Ethan said, staring at a half-disassembled exosuit lying across the workbench, "I need you to place an urgent order for advanced composite materials, graphene-infused polymers, self-healing nanofibers, the works, and please arrange a crash course in materials science and genetic engineering with the very best experts you can find." Alfred raised an eyebrow, but made a discreet note on his tablet. Ethan had reached a limit with his current armor. The synthetic muscle fibers worked exceptionally well for strength augmentation, and the layered plates could shrug off small arms fire. But they failed spectacularly when subjected to superhuman force. During last night's rooftop skirmish, the Bright Knight's gauntleted fist connected squarely with Ethan's chest plate. The impact didn't penetrate the suit, yet it launched Ethan 10 feet backward and left him violently dehydrated and nauseous. Standard buffer layers might stop a bullet, but they did nothing to quell the bone-jarring concussion of a powered blow. Ethan crouched beside the open torso segment, brushing a finger over a bundle of tension cables. "I need precise measurements of that punch," he murmured. "Force vectors, impact duration, energy transfer, everything. Once I have the data, I can redesign the damping system. Next time, the Bright Knight's blow will be absorbed by the suit's shell, not by my ribs." Alfred nodded, already drawing up plans to deploy the Manor's sensor drones over last night's test footage. "Consider it done, sir. I'll coordinate with Professor Fields for the genetic side and Dr. Rise for the materials analysis." A satisfied glint appeared in Ethan's eyes. He straightened, flexing his armored fingers. "Good, because if I'm going to keep this city safe, I need gear that stands up to its toughest adversaries, superhuman or otherwise." Alfred tucked his tablet under one arm and gave Ethan a supportive glance. "I'll get right on it, Master Ethan, and I'll remind you to take a break for dinner before your next sparring partner knocks you unconscious." Ethan cracked the corner of a smile. "Noted, Alfred, but if I'm unconscious, how will I upgrade the suit?" With that, he turned back to his workbench, already running simulations for a new shock absorption prototype. The chase for perfection continued, and no super-strength punch would catch him off guard again. Ethan, the young bat vigilante, couldn't bear the thought of Gotham City falling into the wrong hands. Determined to protect his home, he resolved to confront the mysterious Light Knight, unmask his true identity, and uncover every secret that threat held. Chapter 417. The Debut of Little Superman. Among the very first wave of heroes unveiled by Superman Enterprises was Wonder Woman Diana. Ethan had championed Diana from the start, convinced of her potential, so he made sure she would stand alongside the other inaugural champions. Those early pioneers would become legends, figures that future generations would look back on with awe. While successor heroes would inevitably rise and fall, the first generation would hold a special place in history. And given Diana's extraordinary longevity, she might just remain active for decades, if not centuries. Ethan personally curated each hero's character and backstory, ensuring they embodied integrity and courage. Take the enigmatic Black Bat, for instance, a nod to Gotham's Dark Knight, yet utterly unique. His high-tech exosuit bristled with cutting-edge gadgets, showcasing that Superman Enterprises welcomed heroes of all kinds, whether their power sprang from alien physiology, arcane magic, mutant genes, or sheer financial might. But Black Bat wasn't merely a man in armor. His suit augmented latent metahuman abilities, granting him super strength, enhanced reflexes, and a super jump capability that let him vault entire city blocks in a single bound. This fusion of state-of-the-art technology and genuine superpowers set the tone for the first generation, a diverse, formidable team destined to become legends in their own right. Ethan flipped back through the dossier on the world's earliest costumed heroes. The first one on the list couldn't fly under his own power, but he could leap hundreds of meters in a single bound, and once aloft, he used those leathery bat-like wings to glide gracefully at low altitude. Then there was the Deep Sea King, who deliberately fashioned himself after Neptune. His prime ability? He could command sea creatures with a word, and at one point he even tried to abduct Diana, Wonder Woman herself. Next came Ironbone. An experimental accident had nearly torn his body apart, but by a miracle he'd fused with a sentient metal life form. The result was a half-man, half-machine being, invulnerable, capable of instantly copying any piece of technology he touched. Finally, there was Thunderman, a crackling streak of blue lightning on 2 feet. He couldn't match the Flash's outrageous speeds, but he could generate and hurl natural thunderbolts at will, and he was quick enough to leave most opponents scrambling. These were the very first generation of superheroes, Ethan murmured to himself. A voice from the doorway chimed in. "You're not talking about Superman, Green Lantern, or Uncle John, are you?" Ethan shook his head. No, they were the second wave, long past their prime by the time anyone tried to replicate them. These 4 came before that. They set the template. Ethan set everything up this way to heighten the sense of déjà vu. It was basically like staking an early claim on the name Little Bat. Years from now, if someone calling themselves Little Bat tried to pass themselves off as Batman, everyone would shrug and assume they were just a die-hard Black Bat fan. It's oddly satisfying to think about. As for Diana, she couldn't be happier with her life of righteous heroism, with one supervillain after another popping up and inflicting untold suffering on ordinary people. Public opinion has finally swung in favor of costumed heroes. After all, who else can absorb the staggering price of pensions, damages, and reconstruction costs? It makes more sense to let these heroes handle the threats and foot the bill than to let society buckle under the financial strain. The wealthy are only too glad to throw their money at the problem, and governments are eager to oblige. That's why Superman Corporation has shot to a market valuation of $100 billion. On paper, it owns no factories or minerals. Its greatest assets are its roster of living, breathing superheroes, and in today's world, they're worth their weight in gold. Diana shook her head with an amused smile. "Can you believe it?" she said. Eon actually approached me in private, offering $10 million a year just to sign with them." She paused, letting the figure sink in. Even now, with the dollar as strong as it is, $10 million a year is absurdly high, more than most people could aspire to in a lifetime. Of course I refused. I'm not in this for the money. I only need enough to get by. Besides, Ethan already pays me a salary. In the original stories, superheroes never earned a cent, but Ethan, drawing on everything he'd learned from running Black Robe Picket, One Punch Man, and Invincible Young Man, saw an opportunity in the fan economy. He launched a full lineup of initiatives, collectible merchandise, feature films, even sanctioned hero versus villain matchups. The result? A market so eager and lucrative that fandom became a cash machine. Die-hard fans would spend anything. No fan convention or online fundraiser was too extravagant. As a result, although the overall superhero industry was valued at a staggering $100 billion, its true revenue pace depended entirely on how fast Ethan could churn out new content. And he had the Midas touch. Money poured in. Heroes who'd once scrounged for change in their utility belts now found themselves flush with cash. Naturally, several of my colleagues, other costumed heroes, received their own offers from the same mysterious backers. But one after another, they all declined. "We're heroes," they said, "not mercenaries. A few crooked villains with deep pockets won't shake our principles." And so they remained loyal to Ethan's operation, content to keep fighting for justice rather than chasing the highest bidder. Ever since the corporate tycoons failed to win over the original generation of heroes, they've turned their sights to civilian superhumans, desperate to copy the formula that made Superman Corporation an empire. Almost overnight, super, ultimate, and hyperhuman companies sprang up everywhere, but none came close to matching Superman Corp's prowess. Today, Superman Corp controls nearly the entire market. The leftover scraps barely sustain the smaller outfits. Ethan observed the scramble with quiet amusement. He knew that, when money was at stake, businessmen would swarm any promising new field, and when imitation stalled, they'd resort to mudslinging to slow down the leader. Yet he remained untroubled. His company boasted a rock-solid legal department, staffed with elite attorneys who'd never lost a case. It wasn't by chance that his father, Ethan Sr., earned the title Father of Superheroes, the man who first dreamed up the idea of costume champions. Even in an alternate universe where Marvel Comics once thrived, it was Superman Corp's vision that ultimately reshaped the industry. Every competitor that followed was merely riding its coattails. All the while, Diana couldn't wait for Ethan's public debut. She longed to see him step onto the battlefield of heroes so she could welcome him properly as her senior, especially before that little bat tried to steal the spotlight. Chapter 1. Superboy's Big Moment. Clark Kent's career as a costumed hero officially began today. From now on, he would be known to the world as Superboy. None of it would have happened without Ethan. He'd convinced Clark that when his own debut came, he would take the name Superman, and together they would be the legendary Superman brothers. Of course, Ethan never really planned to call himself Superman. It was just a convenient story to get Clark on board. And Clark didn't question it. He'd never met Lana Lang. He wasn't content to linger as some hometown curiosity, and Ethan had carefully shaped his values from day one. Now Clark aimed only for the highest echelons of heroism, and he suspected a partner whose standards matched his own loftier ambitions. Even Lois Lane, once his ideal, no longer seemed to fit the bill. Ethan, for reasons of his own, perhaps a touch of spite toward Bruce Wayne, insisted that Clark hide his true identity completely. He was outfitted in a form-fitting blue suit, a flowing red cape, and a mask that covered every inch of his face and neck, leaving only his trademark hair visible. "Ethan, do you really think I can pull this off?" Clark asked, voice low and tense. "It's already done," Ethan replied coolly. "The Superman Corporation has released your first promotional video. The moment you appear to stop a crime, everyone will know who Superboy is. You won't have to build your reputation block by block on the streets. You'll make your mark instantly." Clark took a steadying breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. There was no turning back now. His debut as Superboy was set, and the world was watching. "That's the advantage of having someone watching your back," Clark said with a grin. "Most street vigilantes have to grind for years just to get noticed. You, on the other hand, are already famous before you've even made your debut. Believe in yourself." Clark clapped Ethan on the shoulder. Ethan lifted a spoonful of the steaming chicken soup to his lips, the rich aroma and warmth chasing away the last of his doubts. Chapter 418. Clark the Iron Forger. Clark winced as a blast of superheated steam hissed past him, scorching the metal frame he'd just finished welding. Even so, he straightened and offered a sharp nod, undeterred by the near accident. In their world of supercriminals, bodily mutations spawned uncanny abilities, and only the bold or the desperate survived. Ethan had set his sights on Clark months ago. As Clark's mentor, Ethan had guided him through rigorous training in materials science and energy manipulation before steering him into genetics and biochemistry. Clark had devoured every scrap of knowledge he could find, especially the dreaded Four Abyss compendiums, and in many ways had already outpaced Ethan's other protege, the enigmatic engineer known as Little Bat. Little Bat, by contrast, was deep into robotics engineering. One of his foremost projects was artificial muscle technology, polymer fibers spun from high-strength polyethylene and nylon that mimic and in some respects outperform natural muscle tissue. His latest triumph, the second-generation Hercules batsuit, was the brainchild of a truly global collaboration. Scientists from the United States, Canada, Australia, Little Baga, Turkey, and mainland China had all contributed to the project. The result was astonishing. These polymer muscles could hoist a load 100 times heavier than real muscle of the same volume. Even more remarkable, the fibers responded to ambient temperature, expanding in the heat and contracting in the cold. A practical demonstration came in the form of self-adjusting window shutters constructed from the same material. They automatically swung open on sweltering days and snapped shut when the air grew crisp. As Clark wiped away the sweat on his brow, he allowed himself a rare smile. With allies like Little Bat and Ethan watching his back, there was no limit to what they could forge. Ethan studied the innovative fabric spread out before him. At first glance, it looked like any high-tech textile, but in fact, its pores opened and closed automatically. When an electric current passed through it, the material could bend, stretch, twist, or contract, move so fluid they mimicked real muscle fibers. These artificial muscles were engineered from just 3 amino acids, valine, proline, and glycine, arranged in a precise sequence inspired by biology. Like human muscle tissue, the fabric was elastic, expanding and contracting in response to changes in temperature or chemical environment, such as pH shifts. Ethan couldn't help but recall the astonishing power of nature's own designs. A toad's jaw muscles can generate a force more than 700 times the creature's body weight, and a chameleon's tongue contraction delivers similarly breathtaking speed and strength. By comparison, the finest electric motors humanity has produced muster only about 1/3 the force of that toad's bite. But with cutting-edge control systems and neural interface technology, these artificial muscles could do more than just match biology. They could surpass it. Mechanical tendons and synthetic fibers linked directly to a wearer's neural signals would allow seamless coordination with the human brain. The result, dramatically enhanced motor function, bringing the dream of supercharged strength and agility one step closer to reality. Ethan knew that no matter how faithfully he replicated a toad's musculature, the real breakthrough lay in the neural interface system, the high-end coordination gear that links brain to bionic muscle. After all, any biological actuator lives or dies by its ability to respond instantly to thought. With his Little Bat project, Ethan was finally on the verge of something big. He'd long believed that artificial muscle armor held more promise than bulky exoskeletons. Exosuits were plagued by structural and power distribution problems, whereas synthetic muscles had already proven their basic viability. They just needed smarter support systems. To cover every scenario, Ethan developed 2 distinct types of bionic muscle fibers. 1, chemical; 2, electrical muscle. These fibers are woven from carbon nanotube bundles infused with catalytic particles. As they flex, they double as fuel cell electrodes and supercapacitor plates. In a hydrogen-rich environment, the reaction continuously generates electricity, powering the wearer without any external battery pack. 2, chemical to thermal muscle. Here, a controlled mix of hydrogen and ethanol ignites a heat-producing reaction that activates shape memory alloy wires embedded in the fibers. When heated, the memory metal contracts or relaxes with precision, converting thermal energy directly into mechanical work. With these 2 innovations under his belt, Ethan was confident that Little Bat's artificial muscle armor would redefine what a suit of powered armor could achieve. Chapter 1. Debut in Metropolis. When the temperature drops, the memory alloy wires inside the artificial muscle contract, the catalyst's activity diminishes, and the muscle fibers relax and shrink. Using this principle, we've engineered an artificial muscle that delivers more than 100 times the lifting power of a normal human muscle. With that kind of strength, even the imaginary villain Bright Knight is no match for our pint-sized hero, Little Bat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Our real story begins with young Superman's first mission, a routine bank robbery in downtown Metropolis. The culprit, who calls himself President Snailfoo, stormed into the lobby wearing his signature mask and wielding 2 submachine guns. Slung over his shoulder was a customized assault rifle with a high-capacity drum magazine. The terrified customers on the floor didn't dare move. Then, with a single crack of thunder, Clark appeared. "Stop right there," he called out. President Snailfoo scoffed. "Superhero?" He leveled both submachine guns at Clark's chest and opened fire. The roar of gunfire echoed through the marble hall. Most people would have panicked, but not Clark. If it weren't for Ethan's relentless training, unleashing volleys of live rounds and every kind of cannon at him in our basement range, he'd probably be shaking in his boots right now. Instead, Clark relied on super speed. He blurred to the side, and the bullets shredded only empty air. Superman dodges bullets, after all. Now that's not something you see every day. This must be a very strange parallel universe. Ethan had drilled into Clark that every attack, no matter how harmless it seemed, had to be dodged. You could never afford to assume you weren't afraid. You had to respect every threat. "Caution is the kingly way," Ethan would say, rolling the words on his tongue as if they were gospel. He often mused about the idea of training a Superman with Batman's mindset. If Clark learned that discipline and wariness, who would need the Justice League? Clark, of course, obeyed his big brother. So when President Luosifu's goon opened fire with a submachine gun, Clark slipped and spun, letting the bullets ping harmlessly off his bioforce field. Then, lightning fast, he surged forward and landed a single punch. Boom! The sound of metal against flesh, or something like it, rang through the warehouse as Luosifu flew backwards, slamming into the far wall. Clark stood frozen, staring at his fist. The impact had felt like hitting a thin sheet of steel. Luosifu stumbled back to his feet, a froth of blood bubbling at his lips. Clark blinked, and the next moment felt a flicker of motion in his chest. Then he was gone, only to reappear directly in front of the gangster. "Asshole!" Luosifu spat, ripping open his shirt in panic. Clark's eyes widened. Where skin should have been, a smooth metallic surface gleamed under the harsh warehouse lights. The man's chest and arms shone like polished chrome. Clark swallowed hard. This fight was turning out to be far stranger and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Ethan stared in disbelief at the figure before him. Its body gleamed like polished steel, radiating raw, unspoken power. "Steel body?" he blurted out. He'd earned that title himself. His flesh was said to be as hard as steel, but this opponent's metallic sheen was something else entirely. This was pure, unyielding steel. "Go to hell!" President Snailfu snarled, swinging a massive fist. The blow crackled with kinetic energy as metal struck the air. Ethan slipped aside, his reflexes honed to perfection, then lunged forward and drove a backhand straight into Snailfu's chest. Crack! The impact echoed like a giant hammer smashing an anvil. President Snailfu sailed across the courtyard and collapsed in a crumpled heap. If Snailfu was wrought iron, then Ethan was the master blacksmith. Ethan stepped closer, breathing steadily, and surveyed his fallen foe. "Alloy or not," he said coolly, "you're still nothing but clay before my fist." Snailfu tried to rise, but his ribs were visibly caved in. He gasped for breath, rage and disbelief storming his silver eyes. There was no denying it. He had met his match. Chapter 419, Teasing the Little Bat. Superboy, Superboy. Why does everyone only care about Superboy? The headline had been taped to the inside of the reinforced glass, and the young hero with the shock of blonde hair slammed his fist against it in frustration. He glared at the newspaper clipping as if the mere sight of it stung. "I've saved more lives than I can count," he muttered, voice tight with anger. "I've taken down more gangs than any headline grabber. Why won't anyone pay attention to me? Ethan's own pick for our nation's second-generation champion. Chosen by Ethan himself to uphold justice in the motherland, he should have been celebrated. Like Clark, he'd been born with extraordinary gifts. Yet here he was, overshadowed by a masked newcomer whose face nobody knew. In his mind, a true hero stood for truth above all else, and hiding behind a mask was the very opposite of transparency. Ethan had drilled that principle into every protege. Honesty, openness, a hero who showed his face to the world. To them, that symbol of secrecy was an affront. Because so many of them had lost families, believing themselves to be nothing more than lab experiments, they longed for something real, something genuine to believe in. And in their eyes, Superboy's secret identity was anything but genuine. Ethan had managed to keep his homeland in the dark about his new life. Unbeknownst to them, he'd become the godson of the retired hero Henry Luthor, and more remarkably, had forged a genuine friendship with both Luthor and Clark Kent. There was no hint of coldness or suspicion from either hero. In return, Ethan's handlers back home were only too happy to reward his loyalty. If only they knew how Clark would react when he finally removed his mask. "Azu, stop worrying." One of the agents chided him gently as they gathered in a glass-walled conference room. "Superboy's unplanned appearance lined up perfectly with our corporate strategy, and you're in line to be one of its greatest beneficiaries." "Godfather?" Ethan asked, glancing at the older man beside him. "I still don't follow." Their senior operative leaned forward, folding his hands. We've nearly exhausted the fan economy goldmine built around the first generation of heroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the rest. Their popularity's at an all-time high, and it's bound to plateau unless we do something new. That's where you come in. He tapped a datapad on the table. If you agree to take up the mantle of a second-generation hero, Superboy 2.0 if you like, we'll keep the public's attention entrenched in the Superman brand. We'll control the narrative, the merchandise, the media buzz. Superman Inc. keeps burning bright. Ethan frowned. A second-generation superhero. A ripple of excitement ran through the room. To these agents, the idea of an heir to their idols wasn't just business. It was a dream come true. And now their own protege might very well become that hero. Ethan stood before the assembled crowd in the Superman Company's Grand Hall, watching their excitement ripple through the room like electricity. Since the day the Motherland backed the superhero initiative, the public had only thrown themselves into it with greater fervor. This program wasn't merely about training crime fighters, it was a full-blown effort to manufacture living gods. Just ask Da Fei of the Pig Factory team. Like many professional gamers, he first rose to fame through the original God Project. Its inaugural cohort, the Original Five, also known as the Super Five or Fantastic Five, became instant legends. That last nickname sprang from their superstar member, Wonder Woman Diana. She was the only woman among them, and her blend of grace and raw power was so overwhelming that the other four working in unison still couldn't match her. Playfully, fans dubbed the rest Wonder Woman and her sidekicks. Godfather, a hopeful young recruit, blurted out, his eyes shining, "Can I sign up for this plan too?" He practically vibrated with anticipation, craving nothing more than applause, adoration, and a swelling fan base. Joining a program designed to create deities would catapult his popularity to unheard-of heights. Ethan tapped the mic, his voice calm but commanding. This new project is called Teen Titans. The words hung in the air, brimming with possibility and challenge. As the crowd leaned forward, eager to learn more, Ethan knew one thing for sure. The real trial was just beginning. Teen Titans? Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering the name. It fit perfectly. This would be the first team made up entirely of teenage heroes, just as the original Teen Titans had been. Established decades ago by the young sidekicks of DC's greatest champions, the Teen Titans had a lineage almost as storied as the Justice League and had inspired countless spin-off groups over the years. Ethan thought Homelander and Clark would slot right in. Both were still teens, Homelander, a slightly subdued Superman analog, and Clark, the pint-sized powerhouse. As for Ethan himself, he was certainly young enough, but he was tied up supervising the Little Bat project and couldn't join the roster just yet. He pictured the classic lineup. Robin, Batman's protege, Kid Flash, the Flash's sidekick, Aqualad, Aquaman's apprentice, Wonder Girl, Wonder Woman's younger sister, Speedy, Green Arrow's assistant. Now, Ethan intended to follow the pattern set by the copycat Justice Leagues and launch his own Teen Titans. But this version promised to be far more formidable. Even in his weakened state, Homelander far outmatched most Teen Titans. Only Wonder Girl might stand a chance against him. And with Clark's raw Kryptonian strength rounding out the team, their combined power would be off the charts. The agency back home was delighted with the name Teen Titans. It implied a group on the brink of adulthood, ready to take on the world. Frankly, Ethan had no real choice in the matter. He tapped his communicator. "Godfather, if we go with Teen Titans, does that mean I'm stuck teaming up with Superman?" There was a pause on the other end as the Godfather weighed the idea. Finally, he said, "Both of you command enormous fan followings. A partnership would only strengthen public confidence." Ethan gave a single nod, even though no one could see him. Understood. The Godfather allowed himself a thin smile. In that room, self-interest always came first. If it served their agenda, they would cheerfully bundle up little Superman for the cameras, and then move on to the next spectacle. No sooner had Ethan ended the call than he leapt into action. He raced back to Gotham City, eager to check on his partner, the boy the tabloids had already christened Little Bat. When Ethan arrived on a rain-slick rooftop, the youngster stood silhouetted by the city lights in a brand-new batsuit, chest plate gleaming, cape snapping in the wind. He prowled the dark streets below, ready to dispense justice and stir a little fear. Ethan knew this kind of swagger would draw a reaction from the bright night. As if on cue, a figure in shining armor dropped into view beside Little Bat. "Knight of Light!" the armored hero boomed, scanning the rooftop shadows. Little Bat straightened, glancing over his shoulder. His voice was calm, even amused. "Wrong person, Knight of Light. You've got the wrong bat." With that, the young vigilante melted into the night, leaving the light knight blinking in confusion, and Ethan smiling at the familiar spark of mischief. "I'm not the Knight of Light. My name is the White Emperor." Ethan stood in his spotless white armor, voice ringing out across the alley. Little Bat froze beneath the flickering neon. White Emperor? He'd half expected the legendary Bright Knight, but this newcomer was something else entirely. Still, he didn't hesitate. "Whoever you are, take off that mask." Without a word, Little Bat lunged forward and threw a slim dart. Ethan's eyes flicked to the utility belt strapped low on his hips, a marvel of engineering crammed with batarangs, gas canisters, and gizmos of every conceivable shape. He heard whispers that Batman's belt could hold a small armory. Now he saw it in action. Little Bat's dart was no ordinary projectile either. It released a dense smoke laced with a powerful anesthetic, designed to choke and sedate all at once. Ethan calmly drew a white, pumpkin-shaped bomb from his belt, the same design the Green Goblin once perfected, now reimagined in pristine ivory. He hurled it toward Little Bat. The masked vigilante's pupils constricted when he spotted the carved skull grinning on its surface. The faint ticking of a flash and stun mechanism left no doubt. This was no toy. In the next heartbeat, the pumpkin bomb detonated with a searing flash and concussive blast, swallowing the alley in white light. When the glare faded, Ethan stood alone in the drifting haze. The challenge had been laid. Little Bat would not retreat so easily. And the White Emperor had only just begun to make his mark. Boom! In the next instant, the Little Bat's dart detonated in midair. The force of the explosion sent it and the bat tumbling dozens of meters back. Ethan didn't hesitate. He flung his crescent-shaped dart and both blades sank into the creature's underarm, pinning it hard against the stone wall. Chapter 420, Making Big Things Happen in DC. The Little Bat never expected the Dark Knight to deploy explosives, but he wasn't worried. Even if the blast caught him, he'd go down with his opponent, and that was no worse than eliminating the threat outright. Still, there was no denying Batman's ingenuity. Underestimating him now would be a fatal mistake. Mustering every ounce of power, the Little Bat sprang skyward, using the crescent moon dart affixed to his forearm like a springboard. His black cape fanned out behind him as he sent a flurry of batarangs hurtling toward his target. Ethan watched the incoming blades with cool confidence. Batman wouldn't rely on a single ineffective trick twice. There had to be more to this. A concentrated explosive charge? A non-lethal shock device? He pivoted at the last second, narrowly avoiding the whistling projectiles, his eyes scanning their design. Almost instantly, the batarangs accelerated, their edges blurring as they sliced through the air. What amazed him was the spin. There were no propellers, no special boomerang curve, yet they spun faster and faster, driven by some hidden mechanism. "Nicely done," Ethan muttered, amusement creeping into his voice. If aerodynamics had a fan club, these would be the star attractions. Ethan's eyes narrowed as more guided batarangs streaked toward him, angling for the gaps in his armored vest. Boom! One of them detonated, unnaturally. He landed on his back and scrambled up, mind already dissecting the blast. A microcharge of astonishing power. What kind of explosive could deliver that much punch? The energy yield alone exceeded any conventional ordnance he knew. Batman's cape snapped out, billowing around him like living armor and absorbing the shockwave. Ethan dusted himself off, still reeling. A true detonation of that magnitude wouldn't produce fiery plumes or rolling black smoke. Those are cinematic flourishes, the product of added fuel. The raw blast would be swift and silent, leaving only shrapnel behind. "So much for the Dark Knight's pure power," Ethan muttered. "You love your theatrics, don't you?" He ran a gloved hand over his chest plate. "Before you start lecturing me on physics, how about you learn what real explosives can do?" He bristled at the thought of Batman's shortcuts. If this was the best the caped crusader could muster, Ethan was more than ready to prove superior technique beat showmanship any day. Ethan's artificial muscle suit throbbed to life, hydraulic fibers rippling beneath its surface. In a heartbeat, his right arm ballooned, its gauntlet swelling to twice the girth of his left. With a rasping roar, he unleashed his fist. Wind howled around it, sparks danced where metal scraped air, and tiny red heat spots bloomed across the plating. Ethan was convinced this one blow would finish the Dark Knight once and for all. There was no way Batman could merely be felled or even knocked out. This strike would kill him. Bang! The impact never came. Instead, Ethan stared in disbelief as Batman's armored gauntlet closed around his fist, halting the punch mid-arc. Under the cowl's rimmed lenses, the hero's eyes widened, an astonished flicker in an otherwise impassive mask. Impossible. Every readout in Ethan's suit insisted that this punch was unstoppable. Either their data was fundamentally flawed, or Batman had concealed the true extent of his strength the last time they met. Ethan's lips curled into a sneer as he straightened. "I was prepared to show restraint," he declaimed, voice ringing with false moral fervor, "but you go out of your way to murder innocent people. You call yourself Gotham's protector, but you're nothing more than a super criminal. I am the White Emperor, and I will never allow criminals like you to run rampant through my city." As he spoke, his henchmen shifted uneasily behind him. Some murmured their discontent, uncomfortable with the self-righteous tone Ethan had adopted. But he paid them no mind. All that mattered now was that Batman, the ever-elusive Dark Knight, had just revealed he was more formidable than any files or forecasts had ever shown. And Ethan, White Emperor of Gotham, would need a new plan. In his gleaming white armor, Ethan cut an almost regal figure, his presence dwarfing Batman's dark silhouette. The young Bat, still wet behind the ears and easily swayed by high-minded moralizing, felt his confidence waver. If it had been the seasoned Batman standing there, he'd have remained unflappable. But this kid Bat hesitated. "My punch won't kill you," Ethan said evenly. "It will only strip you of the power to fight back." The kid Bat's eyes flashed. "Your blow was nearly supersonic, and you claim it couldn't kill me? If you hadn't held back, that strike would have been like slamming into a car at 300 kilometers per hour. Do you honestly think I'd walk away from that?" Ethan's pale lips curled into a cold smile. He pressed forward, relentless. The kid Bat went silent. His hundredfold calculations had never steered him wrong, but if the White Knight doubted him, what chance did he have? Ethan's voice dropped to an unsettling whisper. "I, Lord Bidey, have many more strikes like that." Before the kid Bat could brace himself, Ethan's fist shot out and slammed into his midsection, the impact echoing like thunder in the silent chamber. The punch came in an instant, so fast that little Bat didn't even have time to raise his guard. In a heartbeat, his armored suit shattered into shards of metal and carbon fiber. His helmet tumbled away, gone before he could snatch it back. Stunned, little Bat stood rooted in place. Who could wield such raw power? This was no ordinary martial skill. It had to be something far beyond human strength. Across from him, the bright knight, Ethan, paused in genuine surprise. His voice, muffled by the helmet's speakers, crackled out, "Bruce Wayne?" The name struck little Bat like a bullet. Bruce Wayne, the genius playboy philanthropist of Gotham, was his masked opponent. His secret at last lay bare. Panic flared in his mind. Close-quarters combat against Ethan was hopeless. No suit could withstand a blow like that. He vowed then and there never to let Ethan get this close again. From now on, he'd keep his distance. Fight with gadgets, with ranged tactics, anything but melee. Ethan saw little Bat's posture tighten, saw the sudden wariness in his stance. He could almost hear the smaller man's thoughts. No more up-close attacks, no more charging in. Probably desperate to pull out a batarang or some other trick. A faint smile curved beneath Ethan's visor. Good. Let him keep his distance. Now Ethan held all the cards. Bright Knight's voice rang out in the alley. "I never expected the son of a wealthy magnate to don a costume and dispense vigilante justice. Though that doesn't mean I approve. Playing hero is a dangerous game in Gotham City." With that, he turned and strode away, leaving the little Bat alone in the dim light. The boy sighed. His suit lay in tatters at his feet, and without his comlink, he couldn't reach Alfred. Worse, he was completely naked, and would have to walk home that way. If anyone spotted him, tomorrow's headlines would read, "Shocking! Gotham heir found naked on street. victim of robbery, or a psychopathic exhibitionist? Hidden in the shadows, Ethan watched the scene unfold and couldn't help but smile. This mishap gave him the perfect inspiration. Why not stir up a little chaos in the DC universe? He'd awaken the feminine side buried deep within Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne and stage the grandest wedding Gotham had ever seen. After all, the Marvel Universe next door already boasted a timeline where a female Iron Man wed Captain America. Surely the DC heroes deserved their own unexpected twist. All that remained was finding the right moment to expose Clark and Bruce's secret identities and watch the world react. Should we bring in a third subject, Baldy Lie? Ethan paused, weighing the proposal. If Bruce underwent the transformation, he'd re-emerge as a dark, brooding young woman. Baldy Lie, on the other hand, would become an imperious overbay, ringlady. And Clark, turning her into a woman would be utterly dull. She was too innocent and naive to spark any real intrigue. No, Clark was off the table. The real excitement lay in crafting someone with shadowed depths or haughty arrogance. Baldy Lie's transformation promised far more drama.